We'll call to order a work session for this evening to talk about update information on the underpass. We do have public speakers tonight, quite a few of them, so I'm going to be a little more strict than usual, and I'm going to ask you to hold your comments to 3 minutes. We've got a lot of ground to cover tonight. First speaker is Sonia Reese.
What has to happen? Oh, now I can.
You're ready.
Thanks for my chance to share my thoughts on the proposed Uptown Underpass. My history with the development of the Uptown runs deep and wide. I served on the town council for 24 years, starting in 1991. In the early years, we pushed to be debt-free. That noble goal put the town in the enviable position to get the lowest interest rate on debt and thus undertake the major transformative project we now know as Uptown Normal. In 2000, 19 years ago, we made a redevelopment plan that laid out the configuration of the circle and the buildings that would surround it. And that included in that plan a district south of the railroad tracks. At that time, we were able to have grade level crossing. But now we know with the expansion of the tracks, with the two rail systems coming in, which is a good thing, it's made it unsafe for grade level crossing. So the question remains, how do we get to the south side? Should we continue to walk down Linden and around? Let's think about that. In the future, the 200+ Children's Discovery Museum field trip buses will need to park across the tracks. Bus loads come from as far away as Chicago or Sinclair County. I want you to imagine leading 40 third graders holding hands down across the tracks. And when a train is in the station, you're going to have to wait 10 to 15 minutes to get those kids across safely. It's certainly not a safe option for all the bikers and runners that use the trail, and I can't imagine an uptown shopper wanting to walk down that way to get to the South District. Perhaps a bridge 30 feet high over the tracks. They have 2 elevators on either side, but they would be connecting just the railroad stations. Again, not conducive to shoppers, residents, and trail users. Frankly, I don't expect businesses and services to want to develop that area without easy access to the vibrant uptown economy. It's just not going to happen. So, I favor the underpass. I made lots of tough decisions in my years on the council to get you and me to this good place that I understand is now your role. This community is exceedingly fortunate to get a federal grant to help build this. I'm counting on each of the 7 of you to not let this opportunity slip through our hands. It's not going to come our way again. Thank you.
Next speaker is Tim Ryan.
Good evening, members of the council, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to come before you and speak. My name is Tim Ryan. I'm a resident of Normal. I've lived in Bloomington Normal my whole life. I'm also a 10-year member of Labor's Local 362 and a 5th-generation laborer. I have the great privilege of working for the Laborers Health and Safety Fund of North America as a tri-fund coordinator for a 10-state region, and I'm also the marketing director for Labor's Home Development Corporation, a nonprofit affordable housing provider or developer. I'm here tonight to express my support for the Underpass project, and there are a couple reasons why. The first reason is for the career opportunities that it provides to the men and women of McLean County. In the trades, we say that we have career opportunities. We don't have jobs. Every single day, our men and women go to work for their career because it's what they love to do. These types of projects are the types of projects that can get member insurance for the next year or qualify for insurance in the current year. These types of projects are what allow a person to retire once they've earned that credit they need towards their pension. These are the types of projects that keep men and women working and are able to provide for their families throughout the year. But not only does this provide a career opportunity for the men and women of McLean County, it provides a great development opportunity. As I mentioned, Labor's Home Development Corp. Is a nonprofit affordable housing provider and developer. And we've been actively trying to find a spot in McLean County to put a development for affordable housing. I cannot think of a better place to consider than Uptown Normal. While it's not guaranteed that we would ever build across the other side of the tracks or that we would ever be able to develop something over there, with the removal of the underpass, it does give us that opportunity and the ability to make that argument that this is a good spot to build. Not having an underpass there is a great barrier that's in place. It would be very hard for us to market to tenants that it is a easy access to Uptown when they have to go out of their way to access all the great services that Uptown has to offer. This project, again, I'd just like to express that it provides a career opportunity for the men and women of McLean County in the trade movement. It provides a development opportunity, not just for housing, but anything across the tracks. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ron Ulmer.
Good evening, Ron Ulmer, a Normal resident. I'm not here to be a proponent of the tunnel or oppose the tunnel. I just want to make sure we don't make some omissions. Want to make sure that the tunnel is built as user-friendly. If it is built, it's as user-friendly and built cost-effectively as possible and user-friendly as possible. While the results of Uptown are generally very positive, costly omissions were made as well as omissions that result in less use of Uptown than possible. To avoid these omissions, I recommend that a team of all the stakeholders be formed, the UP, Amtrak, the town departments, passengers, trail users, and others. The key is to have a proven facilitator who knows absolutely nothing about the project. The person who will ask the stupid questions. How did we get here with respect to the tunnel? Well, UP, Amtrak, and the Rail Safety Division, and I called the ICC, had not allowed an at-grade crossing, pedestrian crossing, in decades. 3 of the 4 players knew that. UP, Amtrak, and the ICC knew that. Normal did not know that. Railroads do not like to share information, so you have to deal with that, including UP and Amtrak. However, the town assumed, no assumptions please, that the grade level crossing at the old station would continue to be used. And omission of a pickup and drop off at street level has caused many passengers not to use Amtrak trains after a couple of times of attempts using the train. And many drivers that bring them to the station and pick them up refuse to go into the parking lot even to use the pickup area that was thought of as an afterthought. Lastly, while it was commonly known by the property owners and several members of the town's staff, the engineering department was either unaware or totally omitted from their design of the utilities, the town's utility underpasses under the new railroad tracks, that the south track was going to be moved 7 feet further south. You folks, a prior council passed a $300,000 budget adjustment, and I'm sure that in the general amount, 10% I believe of cost overruns and all, a lot of it was buried there. So, not only was that 7-foot movement of the tracks, which I knew, and as I say, I know several staff members of the town of Normal know.
Ron, I'm going to ask you to
Okay.
close out.
The engineering department either didn't know or failed to include it in their plans. Thank you.
Next speaker is Patrick Dullard.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Dullard. I'm a resident of the town of Normal. I guess I'm going to come in as two roles, one as a resident and the other as president of the Friends of the Constitution Trail. We look forward to an underpass being built there to return the contiguous line that the trail originally was laid out at. I can tell you that the town did a great job of making lemonade out of lemons when they closed off that crossing. The trail access that they do serves a purpose, yet it is a congestion area. It's not very safe. I know people that have kind of hit the tracks, and especially on road tire bikes, they've slid into the grooves and fallen and injured themselves. I can tell you from personal experience as someone who rides a tandem that the negotiation of the north turn, where you almost have to go 360, is very, very difficult. I think I might have a bruise or two on my shoulder from my wife to prove that. So I think a continuous nice amenity as we pass from uptown to south of uptown is a good thing. And then I'll transition as a resident of Normal. I'd like to remind the council that Normal, Bloomington, McLean County, we are tax creditors. We send out more tax dollars than we receive back in spending, both on a state level and a federal level. So, like to Councilman Smith's concern about how we don't count that federal dollars in the investment in Uptown. If we didn't get that money, it was going to be spent somewhere else. I don't think that's increasing my tax burden. I think that's optimizing my tax burden. You guys are doing a good job of bringing federal dollars back home. And I appreciate you looking at projects to improve the quality of life here, take advantage of my tax dollar being spent from a federal level back here in Normal. Thank you.
Next speaker is Reagan Ricciuzio.
Good evening. My name is Reagan. I am a frequent visitor to Uptown Normal. At any given time, I might be a pedestrian, a runner, or a cyclist. One of the most pleasant surprises that greeted me when I moved to this community 15 years ago was the Constitution Trail. I use it as much or possibly more than I drive locally. I wholeheartedly support the new underpass proposal. The railroad crossing in Uptown as it is now is dangerous. If you follow the trail the way you're supposed to in order to cross the tracks, you follow it east to Linden. If you are doing so on a bike, you are riding on the actual train boarding platform. Then once you get to Linden, you have an extremely tight turn, at which point you are coming in the direct path of pedestrians or other cyclists coming from the opposite direction. Additionally, whenever you cross the train tracks on a bike, there is the danger of getting your tires stuck in the track. I know of a local woman who broke her clavicle in this such way. If you try to avoid this dangerous scenario by instead choosing to cross the tracks west of the train station, you have to ride in the streets and in traffic, which can also be dangerous, especially for younger people or those who aren't as comfortable biking and with the rules of the road. Neither of these scenarios are good options and put pedestrians and cyclists in danger while they are trying to use the Constitution Trail. Additionally, since we are in close proximity to the Children's Discovery Museum, there are often children in the vicinity that also might be trying to cross the tracks. If we don't make a change, it's only a matter of time before we experience a tragedy at this train crossing. Thank you.
Next speaker is Ross Manuel.
Hi, Ross Manuel. I'm a 25-year member, or not member, but resident of town of Normal, born and raised in Bloomington. So lived here all my life. Moved to Kathleen Drive 25 years ago. And one of the biggest pluses, I think, of living in that area, immediately I realized, was living near the Constitution Trail. I used the trail regularly back then. I use it as often as I can now. To give you some idea of longevity, my son was 3 years old when I started using the trail. I took him along in the child seat, and he's here tonight. Ryan, can you stand up? Yeah, so I fit him in one of those little baby seats that long ago, and we had a lot of good memories on that trail, along with my daughter Sonia. I use the trail as often as I can now. I'd like to thank the town of Normal past and present leadership for your vision in constructing the trail that long ago, and the expansion plan that you have in place today. The railroad crossing that we're talking about at Linden, I cycle the trail more than I do anything else on it. And I know late afternoon, the freight train that comes through there, usually around 4:30, 5 o'clock, it is very problematic as far as causing congestion there with cycling traffic, pedestrian traffic. You have running teams. I mean, you can get 20 or 30 people easily on both sides of the track as that train passes. And I'm talking about the freight train, usually around 4:30, 5 o'clock. I've seen some very near misses. If there hasn't been any serious accidents there up to this point, God forbid, I think you're almost waiting for one there. A lot of people, they get anxious in wanting to continue their run or their ride, and sometimes it gets very chaotic right there. So I see that as a serious problem. I think the underpass is a very positive plan. It'll add seamless flow to the trail that is already there in most other places. It's nice at 57 years old to be able to jump on that trail and get a 20, 25 mile ride in, an urban ride. It's very nice. I like the flow all over the trail, and that would just add to it. Again, thank you to the town of Normal for your past and present leadership for the trail as it exists, and I am very much in favor of the underpass. Thank you.
Next speaker is John Weaver.
My name's John Weaver. I have property in Normal, and I definitely pay taxes in Normal. And I'm here speaking out for my grandchildren. Everybody did high fives when they said the federal government's going to give us $14 million towards the underpass. But the last I heard, the federal government was admitting, or the media was saying, they were $23 trillion in debt. Then I hear on the news media that, well, maybe the state of Illinois is going to put in money. Well, I also look in the media, and guess what? State of Illinois is deep in debt. I was a businessman, and I knew that you just couldn't keep spending money year after year and remain in business, because sooner or later it was going to catch up with you. This thing needs to be looked at as a cost to benefit analysis, and the people that are going to benefit should share more deeply in the cost than just the small business person, taxpayer. I've seen the stormwater maintenance fees. I've paid $23,000 in stormwater maintenance fees, and then I'm being told by staff that they have no equipment to maintain where the stormwater crosses my property. I drive West College every day and have to dodge deep potholes that are not being maintained out by Revan. I was at the meeting when Revan came to the council, and the town agreed to mow the grass and plow the snow, and provide security services. I think we need to focus on what it is that government was instituted for: police, fire protection, water, sewer, have a legal system. But this underpass, as admittedly, started out as an overpass that would have been less than half the cost. But because certain people in the administration wanted a underpass, then they expect the taxpayers to come forward and reach. So when the federal government says we're going to give 14 million, they're reaching in my right rear pocket for the 14 million. The state wants 10 million or whatever they're going to put in. That's coming out of my left pocket. And ultimately, it's going to be my grandchildren that are going to be asked to pay for this. I want a future for my grandchildren. I do not want their future mortgaged by what is done here now and the kind of spending that is, to me, irresponsible. If the federal government had cash in the bank, if the state had cash in the bank, if the town of Normal had cash in the bank to build the underpass, I would say hallelujah. But they don't. So don't mortgage my grandchildren's future. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mark Tiratilli. I've got to throw every one of these away. This one leaks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing some time tonight. So I want to share some of the previous speakers' concerns about cost and timing. I said 3 years ago when I saw this, I mean, this is a gorgeous project. There's no question about that. It comes down to, like you said, cost-benefit analysis. What can we afford and when, and is it worth it? So I want to clear a couple things up. First of all, there is no mandate forcing action right now. Okay, Union Pacific is not insisting that we do anything. We are allowed to continue to cross at the streets on either side. We're allowed to continue as we are right now. There's no urgency on this. The only thing Union Pacific says is that if you want to continue to cross at the trail, well, then you need to go over or under. Okay, so that's where the mandate is. It's not about that we have to do something. We could leave things as they are. There's no problem. Interestingly enough, when Union Pacific issues their guidelines for grade separation projects, they strongly encourage you to go over. What do they cite as the number one reason? Safety. Number two, cost. Number three, disruption. Okay, so their own guidelines would have preferred the overpass. There's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, the original overpass was going to cost $7 million. The underpass 2 years ago was slated to cost $13 million, and now we're up to $23.6 million. I'm a little curious as to why we've gone up $10 million over 2 years on this project. Okay, so there are concerns about how much this costs and is it worth it, and who knows how far away it's going to run by the time it's built. So the federal money, again, we don't need to be so urgent about this. We have until 2026 to spend these dollars. And a point of clarification, this is not money up front. We have to come up with all of the money. The $13 million the federal government is talking about is a reimbursement. Town of Normal has to spend that money first and then go to the government and wait to get reimbursed. So funding, finance, timing is a significant issue, especially given the things that this is really a catalyst for. $50 million library project. You want to tear down the police station and Parks and Rec when they're perfectly usable. We have to build new facilities for those. We're going to get into building more housing developments and other businesses. We're talking about approximately about another $100 million in development down there, and there's a lot of money that needs to be accounted for. And you're going to have a discussion about a sports complex too on top of that. So it's the timing. It's the cost-benefit analysis. I'd urge you to, pun somewhat intended, slightly put the brakes on this. Consider the cost, consider the timing. There's a lot at stake. One final note. If you are going to go forward with this, Union Pacific mandates that you install a shoe fly track to go around, which is expensive, so that you don't disrupt service. There's a company in Canada called Grade Separation Systems that allows you to construct an overpass with only a 4-hour delay in 2 spots. So if that's a concern, there is new technology available to avoid that and potentially save a lot of money on the project. Thank you very much.
Final speaker is Jeff Fritzen.
Jeff Fritzen, 114 Anthony Drive. Just a few thoughts, random thoughts. One, the reason we're here at this juncture is success. About 20 years ago, I was with a group of former council people who were concerned about a vision for Uptown Normal and the amount of public debt that was expected to be incurred to transform Uptown Normal. And I don't think we could have foreseen, I don't know that anybody really foreseen just how successful that vision was going to be, but because of its success, that's why we're here considering this underpass at all. Of course, had the underpass, Dawn, I mean, had the underpass been part of the original plan, it would have been a significant aspect of it, but it certainly wouldn't have caused the kind of concern that we're hearing now that it's identified as kind of a standalone expense. And yet to complement what's happened uptown, to keep moving forward, we, a few years ago, is when I was part of this council, had our planner come in, and Doug Farr, who had helped envision the uptown, and Uptown 2.0, or whatever you want to call it, south of the tracks. The town over the years had accumulated property over there that it didn't have 20 years before, and it made sense that this is property prime for further development to keep the momentum going forward. And if you lose momentum in a community, you lose momentum in this state, you're going to go backwards. So trying to maintain and hold the line really, to me, is taking a step backwards. And so I think as this project has been discussed over the last several years, there have been plenty of opportunities to say, absolutely not, this doesn't make any sense. And yet, while it has been questioned as whether or not this is the best solution, the town has just continued to move forward and move towards this. And we always knowing that there was going to have to be a local match, always knowing there were going to have to be multiple funding sources. And now that you've realized the most significant funding source is available, now is not the time to change course. Now is not the time to change course. As a previous speaker said, those tax dollars are going to be spent. There's no better place to spend them, or invest them is a better word, than right here in Normal. So I would encourage you to keep moving forward. What we didn't know before, we do know now. And I think we're maybe at another crossroads where we can't really say for sure what the future might hold. But there are opportunities, there's possibilities that will not, for instance, the library and some of the other proposed development, those possibilities will not be realized without this. I'm convinced of that. And so this is the best solution. I think we went through that. You've been through that over the last several years. Now it's a matter of, like I said, staying the course and building on the success that Uptown has been.
That concludes our public comment for the evening. Pam, do you want to start this off?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. We are going to spend the next 45 minutes or so, 40 minutes, talking about the underpass project. Wayne Aldrich is going to do a summary of sort of a history, how did we get to this point, and next steps. And so I'm going to turn it over to Wayne.
Thank you, Pam. Good evening. We put together a little PowerPoint presentation really giving a history of the project and going through some of the milestone dates. For some of you, you recall, and others may not, but want to talk certainly about the history and some of the alternatives we've looked at for the underpass. So I wanted to start with some of the partner agencies. We talk about some of these groups, but I wanted to let you know how the town is involved with some of these agencies. First, the United States Department of Transportation, under Secretary Elaine Chao in this administration. So they're the group that awarded the build grant to us. So that comes directly from the US DOT. Underneath the US DOT is the Federal Highway Administration, which we actually have quite a bit of dealings with on the local level, because we do get federal funds for roads quite commonly, either through grants or through pass-throughs from the state of Illinois. So that's one of the federal transportation agencies we deal with quite frequently. The FTA, Federal Transit Administration. We don't deal with them too much, although on this building we did. For the Uptown Station, the Federal Transit Administration was involved as the agency because of the bus component for this building. So that's how we've been involved with the FTA. will Connect Transit, for example, will be involved with the FTA quite frequently. The other transportation agency to mention under USDOT is the FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration. Again, they oversee the rail operations throughout the country. And in this case, under the build grant that we applied for, or the CRISI grants we'll talk through, that is through the Federal Railroad Administration. So we anticipate the build grant will be administrated through the FRA as the project is primarily a railroad type project. The state agencies, primarily the Illinois Department of Transportation, they're sort of set up the same way as USDOT is, so they have highway components and transit components. We deal with them quite frequently. So motor fuel taxes that are dispensed for highway projects come through DOT, and they also are involved with rail projects and bus projects. So we'll talk about the USDOT later on, how they have been involved with the high-speed rail project, and they'll continue to be involved with this project. The Illinois Commerce Commission, is the regulatory agency from the state that deals with railroads and other types of commerce. But in our case, they're particularly concerned with the railroad safety. So we'll talk about them, and they do have funding sources directly related to railroad safety. Amtrak is the National Passenger Rail Corporation. A lot of folks think Amtrak is a big decision maker on a lot of things, and they actually aren't. They have an operational responsibility for the trains and things like that, and so we're involved with them through our lease agreements in this building and for maintaining platforms, things like that. So we have a good partnership with Amtrak, but they don't come with any funding sources and really no major decisions as far as our experience here with rail passengers. Union Pacific Railroad Company is the host railroad. So in our case, they own the tracks. So any activity performed on the railroads in our community on this set of tracks has to go through Union Pacific. So all of our approvals for things that we do on their property, they have to approve everything. So a little bit about the project history. Beginning with the high-speed rail project, really in January of 2012, the council authorized an agreement with IDOT for the pedestrian overpass improvements to the south platform and the old Amtrak station improvements. And again, this was a part of the high-speed rail project. We didn't know, as you may recall, when we started work on this building from the design standpoint, we didn't know the intentions of the high-speed rail project. We asked our contacts at the time, were the Illinois Department of Transportation, Bureau of Railroads, what are you going to do here with rail? Let us know. And they didn't know. We had an existing at-grade crossing, and so the best information we had at the time, maybe the at-grade crossing would remain. So when we built this building, we actually put an allowance in the contract to provide for safety improvements for the existing at-grade crossing. So it wasn't until they got a grant for the high-speed rail project, and we were actually under construction or very far along with this project, that we found out their intentions for the other platform and actually having two sets of rails here that could be active for Amtrak. So that's kind of gives you a background on that. No one liked the at-grade crossing, we found out as well after that. So the Illinois Commerce Commission, the Union Pacific, or IDOT. None of them liked this existing at-grade crossing, which was never formally approved by the ICC or the other entities, so don't tell me how it got there, but it was there, and it was a nice crossing for a long period of time. So in the summer of 2012, the Union Pacific actually removed that at-grade crossing, and that was a period, you may recall, that we did the little detour over to Linden Street. Then in April of 2014, the ICC authorized $1.25 million for the bridge. So they were aware that we had an agreement with IDOT, and so they authorized money for this safety improvement, which was the bridge at the time.
Wayne, do you want to highlight that that bridge had limited access?
Yes,
Do you want-
so
okay.
this bridge, you might recall, was designed, and again, we were well along our way with the construction of this building by the time this happened. So it was designed to, although integrated with this building, it never had like 24/7 public access. That would have been very difficult to achieve and to make it accessible. So the bridge was designed, as someone else mentioned, it's 30 feet high. So you have to get 26 foot of clearance over the railroad. So it's about 3 stories high. It was steps and elevators on both sides. So although these things have been used in the past, you could argue that it wasn't really convenient for a lot of folks to use. And it was primarily for the Amtrak passenger. That's where the primary inspiration came from. Then in August of 2014, the council authorized the Uptown Plan update. And so here's just a rendering, you might recall, of the Uptown Plan. So during that period, and this was a public process, the plan actually called for an underpass at that point in time. So that was the first talks we had about a larger, more convenient public access across the tracks. And then in November in 2015, the council adopted the normal master plan update, and the underpass was included in that plan as the most favored alternative crossing. So again, it was a public process. I would say it's limited public process because although it was open to the public, there wasn't a big appeal for comments other than, hey, come to our meetings, that type of thing. And so knowing that, we were directed as staff to say, we don't want to build that overpass. Let's try to see what we can do to build an underpass. So we began discussions with the Department of Transportation and the Union Pacific related to this underpass. And so that resulted in a MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding. And it's important to note about the agreements that the town wasn't involved with. In the high-speed rail project, there's an agreement between IDOT, the Union Pacific, and I believe Amtrak is a part of this too. It's a service outcomes agreement. So they, in that agreement, really wanted some sort of grade separated crossing for the primary reason of Amtrak customers and that on-time performance. So they felt it was necessary to have some grade crossing here in Normal to fulfill the service outcomes agreement. So again, the town wasn't a party of that, but know that these organizations want that type of grade separation. So we went to these agencies and they actually understood and agreed with the town's arguments for an underpass or another type of grade separation. They understood that it was more than just an Amtrak crossing. It could be more and promote economic development, accessibility, those types of things. So we were, very happy that they agreed, and both the Union Pacific and IDOT, we met at very high levels, and they agreed with us. And so the agreement with them is this MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, which states that they'll give us additional time to look at an underpass or another type of crossing. They gave us until December of 2021 to look at that. And with the outcome being, hey, if you can't do an underpass, we'd like to see the existing overpass. So that's basically what is in the MOU that was agreed to. And then in 2016, the council authorized construction of the south boarding platform, the old Amtrak station improvements without the bridge. And IDOT then modified their agreement in May to take out the bridge. So they modified our agreement with them. And then ICC, we'd always been in discussions with them, so in September of 2016, they actually, we went and had a hearing with them, presented the MOU and the other information, and they extended their deadline to December 2021 and said, well, you can still use the 1.25 million as well. We'll extend that funding as well. So then in October of 2016, we contracted with WSP. At that time, it was Parsons Brinkerhoff to perform phase 1 engineering, which is a critical component of all federal type work. We call it conceptual design or preliminary engineering, but it's a critical component to these types of projects. And then actually this memorandum of understanding was executed in December of 2016 by IDOT, the Union Pacific, and the town of Normal. In February of 2017, as part of the phase 1 engineering, the town council actually approved study alternatives, project goals, criteria for analysis, and a purpose and needs statement as part of the phase 1 engineering. And I'll go through a few slides related to this alternative analysis. This was all public. As a part of one of the council meetings, we discussed this, and then there was an alternatives analysis report. I'll show some of the slides that were presented at those meetings. But really the problem statement was number of trains has increased dramatically, and you've just witnessed, if you've been around a while, you can tell many of the trains are longer and more frequent, primarily the freight trains. And the average freight train takes about 3.5 minutes to clear if they're moving. And so these are the big container trains and things like that you notice coming through. Pedestrian and bike traffic has increased significantly over the years. Amtrak passengers need to take non-direct routes. So you may know that the town actually purchased a little tram to take folks around to the other side, and Amtrak operates that. And other folks, when the need arises, especially for southbound Amtrak trains, they will take folks over to the south platform so they can load a train over there when needed. And then generally, and you'll see this in many communities, tracks are a perceived barrier through uptown, so we needed some sort of connector. And then the other problem was really needed better access to Uptown South, including folks that are mobility challenged, both passengers and pedestrians. These are slides very uncomfortable. So these are pictures in Normal and at University Street. What has happened, and this happened last fall, as a result of what the railroads call precision scheduled railroading. It's a big thing with the Class 1 railroads. It is a kind of for efficiencies on the railroad part, they're bringing in longer trains. And in our case, because they were performing work in the Bloomington yards, they actually stopped the trains. So last fall, you might recall, we had a big issue with trains stopped in Normal and folks not being able to get around them. The worst part of that is this, pedestrian trespass. So these are, again, taken at University Street. When this happens and a train is stopped, for any period of time, we found that pedestrians have a tendency to trespass and go over the train. So I don't have to tell you how unsafe this is. So we were very concerned about this, made immediate contact with the Union Pacific and the Illinois Commerce Commission. And I think the Union Pacific has made some improvements there. They try to hold trains outside of town or clear the intersections as much as possible, although we still on occasion see this. So one of the points here is, even though these intersections have the best pedestrian safety implements, they have gates, they have audio-visual warnings, there's still this that happens. They're not 100% pedestrian proof. And so enough said about that. But that has become a bigger and bigger issue for this project. And I'll go through these briefly, but these are the alternatives analysis process that we went through. And I want to focus on the project build alternatives there on the right side. So we identified all these alternatives in that stage of the process: an at-grade crossing, an enclosed passenger overpass, a couple different types of overpasses there, and several types of underpass. So these were our chosen alternatives, which the council actually approved the analysis of these alternatives. And then the team came up with screening criteria as well as project goals. So all these items on the right are the different types of screening criteria we're going to use for the analysis of these alternatives. And then just briefly going through the alternatives. Alternative one is an at-grade crossing. Again, although the feds like you to look at the current conditions as one of the alternatives, we had considered this fatally flawed because the railroad, Amtrak, the ICC, IDOT, none of them will allow this, we found. So by policy, they say, no, you can't do that. Alternative two was actually the original overpass that was designed. So enclosed passenger overpass, a narrow structure. This would be about 10 to 12 foot wide. Ideally, open, I guess not ideally, but open only during station hours. It would have been very hard to make this open 24/7, again, to be accessible. Alternative three was basically that same design, only bigger, wider, and hopefully somehow to be able to provide for bicyclists, either with larger elevators or some other types of implements attached. Then alternative three would be the overpass. So we envision some wider, more inviting types of overpass. We've seen this, and Doug Farr actually talked about a few of these. Accessible through stairs and elevators. Again, ramps would be hard because you have to get so high in the air. You have to get about 30 foot in the air, so that's very difficult to get a ramp up that high and really to make it convenient. Alternative four is the underpass option. So this option 4A is a narrow underpass. This is what we would call a bored tunnel. So it's a circular type tunnel. This has been done several places where a tube is just bored underneath the railroad like we do with sewer or water projects, only on a bigger scale. And so you can see by some of these pictures that it's not real wide or inviting. Alternative 4B, an enhanced access public underpass, just a wider underpass built still with access through stairs and ramps if possible, with elevators as well. And then alternative 4C is the public underpass with parks and plazas on both sides. So this is the solution that was ultimately picked by the council and the public, actually. Wide underpass, more inviting underpass with an opportunity for active space on both sides, including parks, potential play for all type parks, and other activities that could be programmed with the Children's Museum. So the team came up with this matrix on their part to analyze all these options based on the screening criteria. So with this analysis, the option 4C became the pick of the team based on this criteria. And then we did have a public open house. Again, all these alternatives were presented at the public open house. And after that, we held the 30-day comment period, open internet. I think you could call in and any other way, comment cards, that type of thing. So we received 41 total comments, and these comments were prepared and put into a spreadsheet and actually presented to council at an active session and discussed. So it was June 19th of 2017, the town council saw this information, including all the options and the public comment, and preferred option 4C, which was the underpass with the public spaces on both sides as the preferred alternate. So, meantime, the Phase 1 project team continues to work and continues now to work on the project elements, including railroad coordination. And the thing to say about that is, and it was mentioned before, is railroads are difficult to coordinate with. I think we've got a great relationship with them, but it's still, who do you have to talk to get something done? And the other problem with the Union Pacific is they've had very large layoffs and change in structuring. So we've made 2 submissions to them on conceptual plans so far and really got non-conclusive responses. So we did visit with some of our friends in Omaha that are helping to push this along. Omaha's where Union Pacific is based, and I think we're at the point where we're kind of breaking the ice with them again and moving forward on the project. We continue to develop the concept plans. Again, the Union Pacific is the major factor there. Again, the thing that we would like to achieve with Union Pacific is the structure type. We showed the bored tunnels, things like that. There's some things that are relatively easy. The underpass that we would like to do, because it's bigger, is like a bridge structure. And so it would have beams and abutments that carry the railroad over the underpass. And the reason we like that is it can allow a wider underpass, more spacious underpass, but it also allows the base of the underpass to be higher, because these other methods just rely on a lot more distance between the tracks and the top of the structure. And a bridge type structure, you can narrow that gap and bring that base up. And so what that does for us is helps out with accessibility. So the south side of the tracks was never a problem for accessibility because we had a lot more distance. But on the north side, we were always restricted. So we feel if we can get this type of structure, we can get better accessibility. Now, someone mentioned shoe flies. Yeah, the railroad prefers shoe flies because it just gets everybody out of the way, and so they can maintain their operations. And it's maybe more efficient for tracks construction as well, or the structure construction. But there are certainly ways to construct these bridge type structures in place. Something similar was done on Market Street here in town. So there are methods, several methods that they've used that will get that structure in place while minimizing, can't say it doesn't compromise some of the freight traffic operations, but there are methods to minimize the impacts on the freight and Amtrak operations.
That's just during construction is what you're
Yes.
referring to.
Yes.
Could you also mention the lifespan of this bridge structure?
Okay, yeah, that came up earlier, but a bridge type structure like this, built per railroad specifications, they anticipate 100-year lifespan. Now, that's not to say there's not maintenance to be performed, but I like bridge type structures better because they're built of components that if you do have to maintain them, you can just take components out and replace components. So rather than tunnels where you don't know what's happening all the time, you've got just more unknowns and potentially larger repairs or more difficult repairs. And then utility surveys, we've been doing utility surveys to understand what's exactly underground there. ICC coordination, we continue to communicate with the Illinois Commerce Commission. And almost last couple weeks, like a call every week to the Illinois Commerce Commission, just telling them where we're at, because they're very, very much concerned about this project and really do at this point support the underpass, and really want to help with this project. NEPA study, we continue. The NEPA is the necessary environmental studies, National Environmental Policy Act, which is required of all federal projects. So we continue to work on that. We were somewhat delayed because the FRA told us we won't review your documents until you get federal funding, and that wasn't our past experience with federal agencies, but they did recently say, yeah, we'll look at them, we just won't sign off. But if we do have agreements with the FRA on the build grant, they will certainly open their doors and start participating with us on those project elements. Grant applications, that's the other major thing this project team has been doing. We applied for a Tiger grant, Tiger's Transportation Investment Generating Economic Recovery. We applied for one of those. 2 CRISI grants, and CRISI stands for Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements. And then again, 2 build grants, of which the last build grant, we received the announcement a week or so ago by Secretary Chow. So,
And it's true, the build grant and the Tiger grants, that the secretary herself
Yes,
makes the
so-
final.
yeah, that's what we've
Approval.
heard. So they're recommended by the agencies, and then they go upstairs to the secretary's desk, and we've heard the secretary can, pick or choose from that pile, and sometimes they will ask for a new project and say, I don't like this or whatever. But from what we've heard, that is definitely up to the secretary's discretion. The CRISI grants are a little bit different because they concentrate on rail safety, and so the administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration makes those decisions, but that's generally a much smaller pot of money. And I wanted to just show these letters of support. We've received a lot of support for the build and CRISI grants, so this is just a listing of most of the letters that we received in support of this project. And then, so the funding picture, when we started phase one of the first things you do is what's your project budget? What are you looking at? So certainly a lot of unknowns at that point in time. So at that point, we figured 24.6 million. Again, it was based on a bridge type structure and amenities, the parks on both sides. Now, prior to the build grant announcement, we were suspicious that we actually were contacted by the build grant team, and they asked, what do you think about your budget? And we did go back to our team, and the team said we can cut about $2 million from the original budget. So the team is confident that they can deliver the project for 22.6. Again, this type of project, we're in phase one. There's every phase of a project, there's going to be estimates performed and care taken with those estimates as the project is developed. And then the build grant award or announcement was $13 million. So other funds of sources of funding include normal town capital funds, ICC grade crossing protection funds. Again, the ICC has said they would give us $1.25 million. One of our next steps is to communicate back with the ICC and get another hearing with them. They've told us they support this project as much as they can. They're limited to $2 million a year per crossing. So again, they've told us they'll support how they can. We think that we may be able to leverage that to the maximum extent with the Illinois Commerce Commission. Possibility with the state capital bill, still funding through the state capital bill is possible as a partner. And knowing that they support this project since the high-speed rail program. Could be other federal funding out there yet to be identified, and other grants, as well as potentially private funding, especially for some of the park-type improvements that we anticipate doing. And then there is a federal Department of Transportation loan program called the Build America Loan Program that would be available for this type of project. Again, it's a loan, it needs to be repaid, but it is a source of funding for this type of project. And I think that's it. Just available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Wayne.
Sure.
I think the point of that was to share some of the history and the analysis that's taken place to this date, and then talk about the funding options. And as we had shared with council previously, we will do our best to explore all possible funding options for continued assistance on this project and keep moving forward. But we'll be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Mr. Nord.
Is it the same obstacle if
Nope.
you're going to put in?
Microphone.
There we go. You had mentioned that for a pedestrian crossing, they really don't want to do those. If it were a street crossing, is it the same obstacle?
I would say it is. The pedestrian safety is different. I mean, I think it's the issue with pedestrian safety more than vehicular safety, but it's, you know, I mean, it's the same issue. You have an at-grade crossing. I think the ICC is very hesitant to, if you were to ask for a new at-grade crossing, they would probably say no.
So
Whether
if
it be
someone,
a street or something else.
okay, so if someone was going to develop and they needed to go across a track with an at-grade crossing, street crossing, we likely would not be able to get that either, is that right?
I would predict that, yes, at this point in time, yes. They would favor a bridge, and you've seen those, bridge overpasses of highways, that type of thing.
Okay. Was there any investigation into possibly rerouting Constitution Trail instead of putting the underpass in?
I'd say at points there was a period in here where everybody was trying to figure this out, and it was after this building was under construction and they first started talking about putting a overpass of some sort in. So we did look at other ways to route the trail. Again, Uptown was either built or partially built, so we did look at, you know, ways to do that. But it would have always involved some sort of grade separation somewhere.
Sure, because it looks like from your drawing where you've got the trail, that the trail could shift over where like the water department is and go across there over to Linden and then just go straight down Linden. You know, and then we don't have the underpass issue, if it's a trail issue that we're trying to accomplish.
Well, it's not just a trail issue, but certainly it's on that route now, but you're talking at an at-grade crossing type of thing?
Yeah, just widen that and.
I mean, that's kind of the do-nothing or alternate, leave it the way it is.
Oh, yeah, well, because it's definitely a cost issue.
Right, but again, the goals that were approved by council is, you know, overall goals, including economic development and accessibility and some of the other things that.
Safety,
Yeah, I think
safety
it's
for
safety,
passengers
yes.
and
Right.
pedestrians.
The Amtrak passengers are a critical component of this movement. Getting them safely from the south platform to the north platform.
Sure, this project started many, many years ago, so the economy's changed, lots of things have changed. But Springfield now is doing a lot of rail activity, and they're doing a lot of rail construction. The engineer that I spoke with said there's $300 million worth of road work being done and crossing work and bridges there. Have we reached out to them? Because they've got people that are actively working with UP right now, and they may have the contacts that we're.
I'm confident we have
Trying
the
to find.
contacts. I mean, we're dealing with associate vice presidents that seem to be able to move things along. And actually, Springfield came to us originally, seeing what we're doing. So with some of their projects, but they're rerouting corridors and things like that, I know. So that's, and again, they preferred grade separation there. So some of their larger projects have been overpasses or underpasses. But a lot larger project because they're dealing with two separate corridors, is my understanding in Springfield.
Yeah, because it's a beautiful design. It's just the federals money, the feds are giving us a lot of money, but still there's that huge $14 million that's left. Where is it going to come from? We've got lots of priorities, and you know, we have to choose where we're going to spend it, and that's kind of my struggle. You know, do we put this money towards the roads, towards other infrastructure pieces that we already have built, and what's the ongoing maintenance we're going to have for all of this? Because there's only so much money, and that's my concern.
It's important to note, though, that when we go for grant dollars, those dollars are not malleable, that we can take them from this project and put them on another project. They're very much directed by the grant structure itself, so we don't have that ability to do that.
Oh, I understand. I completely understand that, but the timeline on this is 2026, so we've got time to see what happens with our economy, at least according to one of the speakers. Is that not right? We don't have.
We don't
2026?
have, other than the ICC order, which is now December 2021. That's really the obligation the town has, is with the ICC. And so again, one of our first responses is going back to them and seeing if they'll give us more money, as well as can you extend the time frame. So one of the things we need to do is go back to the project team, anticipate, railroad approvals and come up with a new time frame. And then the other agreement that I didn't mention is there will be some sort of agreement with the US DOT for this grant, which I assume will have project timeframes and maybe some sunset clauses, but I can't tell you it's 2026 because no one's ever mentioned that to me.
We haven't used that date. The other correction I just want to make, Mr. Nord, you stated a $14 million gap. Mr. Aldrich showed a slide that indicated that we believe we can get the project down to 22.6 million. And with a $13 million federal grant, that is a $9 million gap. So I'm not sure where the 14 million is from.
It
but
must
we're
have been
talking
off the original numbers from a while ago, so my math is off.
So a $9 million grant, and as indicated, we are hopeful that we will continue to work closely with the Illinois Commerce Commission, and we are hopeful that they will be able to access more than just 1.25 million for this project. So we'll continue to work on that to close that gap.
And there are other pools of
Correct.
money that we can go after, and we've been pretty successful at doing that so far. So, Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you. Thanks for the refresher on all of this. I've heard a couple folks make this statement, and I just want to echo it tonight. I know Congressman Davis, at his announcement, thanked our team for their work in Washington, D.C. I was able, the last time we got a no on a grant, to sit in the debrief with the team with the FRA. And if you ever have the opportunity to go sit in on one of those meetings, I highly suggest it. Their team was very impressed by our team about how far they'd gotten, that they'd undertaken NEPA already, when most projects don't even begin to consider that until they get a grant award, if they can get one. And that our team was already underway, and that we showed up in Washington, D.C. to ask them, what can we do better, and what's wrong? Is there just something wrong with our project? And they were very impressed with our team. So thank you guys for the work you've done bringing $13 million of our taxes back to our community so far. You answered the timeline, the 2021, that was I wanted to clarify on timeline. And so you anticipate some conversation and maybe a change in that. And then part two of that is, did I hear you right, say up to $2 million per year?
Yes. So that's their limitation. They're actually, the ICC is looking for a legislative change because they actually, in the capital bill, I think they've got more discretionary money. So they're wondering, how can we spend more money at our discretion because the $2 million really caps them. So they're actually want to go back to the legislature and ask for more discretionary. So that could benefit us as well if they have more discretion in their funds.
I'm imagining this project would span more than 1 year, given the scope of it.
Right, and again, we have a great relationship with ICC, so I think they'll work out, try to work with us any way possible. But we really hope they have more discretion, because I think they would commit more funds to this project.
Okay, so we don't know is the short answer, but you
Right.
see a number of windows.
Yes.
Okay, that's at least encouraging.
The other, just in response, is we did talk to the acting Secretary of Transportation of IDOT a couple weeks ago, and we're going to go back to our partners. That's what we do. We say, hey, things have changed, and they know that things have changed. So we've already communicated with the railroad. They've congratulated us and look forward to working with us. We'll go back to IDOT as our partners, and we'll go back to ICC as well.
And I do want to add, Mr. Aldrich has a very strong relationship with the Illinois Commerce Commission because of Uptown redevelopment and also because of this project and the years that we've been working on it, but also with IDOT and the Union Pacific Railroad and Amtrak, frankly. So our project team has developed strong relationships, so we will continue to build that. And we believe that they will continue to support us. IDOT, ICC, and Union Pacific Railroad, as well as Amtrak, have been very, very supportive of this.
This reminds me of an opportunity I need to take here and talk about our federal delegation, 2 Democratic senators representing Illinois and 2 Republican congressmen. representing the district that this project is in. And I think a strong thank you to them and their team for the work that they did on this project. You know, in today's world, we see a lot of disagreement on partisan lines, and these four elected officials and their staff worked together across the aisle to get this project going. And which, if you know anything about politics in the Congress, the senators and the congressmen usually don't talk to each other, or their staffs don't talk to each other's staffs, and they did in this situation. They worked very, very diligently to push this project through, and so my thanks, and I think council's thanks to them. Ms. Smith.
If you'll bear with me, I have several questions. So the deadline and the memo of understanding by December 2021, as it currently is structured, what do we have to achieve by that date?
I would say that would have to be extended in any case. We feel, you know, phase one will be really delayed based on Union Pacific response. So we're into next year, probably the middle of next year, and I'm given an aggressive schedule to get phase one approved, the NEPA documents approved by the FRA, as well as conceptual plans approved by the railroad. Then we're probably another, I would say 8 months in what we call phase two engineering, which is basically the plan preparation phases. So that's putting the documents together so a contractor can build it. So you're talking then, you know, sometime there in 2021, that time period, maybe middle of the year 2021, if I'm keeping my dates right. And then bidding for construction in about 8 months to a year of construction. So sometime completion, probably middle of 2022. So in any case, we're going to ask for an extension primarily with the Illinois Commerce Commission.
And this might be a combination question for you and Ms. Reese. So are we in fact required to spend the money on the project and then get reimbursement? Or are we able to basically do the project and bill the grant?
As I recall, on this project, we would write the contractor the check. So we would pay the contractor and then immediately be reimbursed. So on a monthly basis, we would submit a pay request from the feds, and that's how it was on this project. So again, we make the payment, whatever it is, to the contractor for that month and get reimbursed on a monthly basis.
So there wouldn't be any need to finance the grant under that payment arrangement? There's no lag, really?
Just on a monthly basis, as I recall from this project. Now, that could change, but I don't believe it would. We'll see when we negotiate an agreement. That'll be in the agreement terms.
And is it possible to phase any part of the project and still satisfy the requirements of the build grant that we've been approved for?
I've been asked that question before. It's hard to phase the bridge, and it's really hard to phase the two sides from a general structural standpoint. The amenities, like if we choose to build a park or something else, those types of components certainly could be phased in, but most of the elements of this project, whether it's structural or drainage, things like that, really need to be done
Upfront.
Yes, so it's just those, the beautiful parts, the aesthetic parts, the park type treatments, that could be phased in later.
So you mentioned that because of the containers sometimes being double stacked, that the pedestrian bridge would require a 30-foot height. So when you do this bridge structure underneath, how much of a grade are we gaining? What's the equivalent height or depth?
I think when we went through this, I think it's like 14 foot as opposed to 26 to 30 feet. So,
14
it's
feet,
half,
14 feet
down
if we go under versus
as
26 to
opposed
30
yes.
above.
So it doesn't have to extend an inordinate distance to accommodate a gradual grade of pedestrians on a ramp,
Right,
or switchbacks.
Yes, and as you see in the drawing here, is this particular concept drawing on the screen anticipated you know, a longer gradual ramp on the south part that could be integrated with some sort of park, amphitheater. And then on the north side, we were very happy when we came up with this configuration, which isn't really a switchback. It's much more pleasant than a switchback and convenient, and I think accessible than a switchback. But this ramp configuration on the north end, if we could build this bridge-type structure, would achieve accessibility guidelines.
And then to piggyback over Mr. Nord's questions about rerouting Constitution Trail, if that were done, bikers still have the issue of unsafe railroad crossing, even though it is at grade. But we are, under the memo of understanding, we are still under obligation to get Amtrak passengers to the south platform.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
And bikers, again, our crossings are skewed, and so some of the issues bikes have, if the tracks are skewed, there's more likely they can get their wheels caught in that track flange. So that's an issue bikers have.
I too ride a tandem, and I can attest to the fact that it's difficult to swing a tandem around on Linden. So I have firsthand knowledge of that. One of the points that you made is showing the potentially students crossing at University. Since this will be here in Uptown, that's really not going to assist with that. Are we taking other measures to try to prevent that kind of trespassing?
We're looking at that in detail. I can tell you that we have had video cameras set up there and in close coordination with the Illinois Commerce Commission. And we are very concerned about that crossing and actually thinking about other ways to route the pedestrian traffic and other things. So we are looking at that intersection. I can't tell you that it will be tied in with this discussion, but potentially it could be.
I will point out that while that photograph in the PowerPoint presentation was of University Street crossing, there are often a number of students, I'm going to jump to conclusions and say they're students, at other crossings such as Broadway, where a very similar situation exists. And while I haven't seen them climb through trains, I have seen them become very impatient, as even this morning when a freight train went through. So that's pretty close to the proposed underpass location here. So there might be a chance where some people would choose to go under and not be delayed by a freight train or a passenger train.
Right. And again, we've done what we can do, and I think the Union Pacific has responded in a very positive way related to that situation.
And one final question to address one citizen's comment. We are only talking about this underpass, and at this point in time, with the priorities of that memo of understanding, the emphasis is on solving an issue of Amtrak passenger access and pedestrian and biker safety, that we're not addressing any project creep and wanting to incorporate any other programs of development. What might happen with private development south of the tracks is not part of our discussion at this time, correct?
That is correct, although we wanted to point out to council in agreements with some of the comments that an underpass, we believe, does present an opportunity for an economic development approach on the south side of the tracks. We do believe that's going to cultivate activity on the south side that does generate increased EAV, et cetera, but in terms of this discussion, it's limited to just the underpass, and that's what our timeline and our financial presentation is about.
Just a comment related to that, because at one point, I did look at purchasing a house in that block bounded by the tracks, Linden, Vernon, and Fell, and apparently there's a lot of those private residences that are used for rental, that they don't make sense above 125,000 approximately, because they're not grandfathered in. And so you can only rent them to two unrelated parties, and for the numbers to work at current mortgage rates, you're not going to see a lot of improvement in those properties. But if there is development on the south side, there might be some more incentive for uses other than private residences there.
Ms. Lorenz, and then Mr. Preston.
Okay.
And we're gonna, and Ms. Cummings. Well, I'm gonna ask you to
Be brief.
be brief.
Okay.
We've got a council meeting in 10 minutes, and we're not
Yes, I
gonna make
was
that
watching the
number.
clock. Okay, so I do have a couple of questions, but I want to start with some comments to get out there. I've been hesitant on this project for a number of years, as long as I've probably been on this council since 2015. I don't think that's any surprise. I'll just leave it at that. I've been hesitant. Somebody raised the point about the timing of this project, and I think that's a reasonable concern. There's probably no good timing for a project like this, and I think that some of our other commenters talked about the courage and the forward thinking that needs to be exercised in crucial moments like this. So that is not lost on me. I do want to point out the fact that, however, that I think it's important for the community to realize, and Mr. Aldridge, you did a phenomenal job on recapping a very long process since 2012. And I think it's important for the community to realize the evolution that's gone on. And in particular, that since 2016, I think it was, or 2017, when we passed the feasibility and the phase one of this project, you might say at that point, the train left the station. And so while it may have been thought that this is still an up or down vote on do we go under or not, I think it's a fairer statement, a more accurate statement to say that this is the direction that the council has taken since 2016. And another way to put this is that we are like a wedding. We have walked down the aisle. We are at the altar. And we even opened our first wedding present, and it was $13 million. I think that's important for the community to understand how far we have come on this project. Even it's impacting me, how far we have come on this project. And so I think it's important to note that we really haven't had, up until tonight, a public discussion about this since 2017, when the forums were held, the public open houses. And so I think it's really important going forward, whatever the time frame is on this, that we continue to have more discussions about this and more input. And to Mr. Ulmer, I believe it was one of our commenters, talked about having the right people at the table and making sure we don't omit something, I think is a very good statement to take heed of. To a question that I have, I just want to correct, for the sake of what I think I've heard said in one case incorrectly and then correctly. One of our commenters said that the Union Pacific is not enforcing this. What's the urgency? I don't think that's accurate. Is that a fair statement?
That's not accurate, because they do have, again, we're not part of these service outcome agreements that were in place from the high-speed rail project, but that's an agreement they're in with IDOT, and they take that very seriously.
So we do have a bit of a time frame on this.
They very much are promoting this project. I'm just trying to promote them to review our plans. Yeah.
And I think Ms. Smith already said that the reimbursement point of we have to put this money out and then get paid back, that's not an accurate statement, because we will be able to bill it as we go.
Based on past experience.
Okay,
yes.
so I think those 2 points of clarification are important. The question I have about maintenance, you look at a picture like this, it looks lovely, it looks like it's probably a sunny day in the spring or the summer. What is your anticipation of the kind of maintenance that would be needed on this on a crummy, gray, snowy, sleety, leaves have fallen kind of day?
Similar to other parts in town, we'll need to, clear the leaves, and we'll need to clear the snow. So that'll be part of our agreements, I'm sure, with the railroad and others, is we'll need to, have some maintenance responsibility like that. So there'll be drainage to be taken care of, as well as just general maintenance like that, yes.
All right. My last point is this, and it's probably a question that can't be answered today because it's quite premature, but we do need to think about going forward. Should there be some amount of money that comes out of our capital fund or somehow that we raise through other mechanisms, that we look at our debt ceiling or debt thresholds, and also where the debt service would come from. And those are some, getting way down into the weeds, probably prematurely, but that time will come soon enough to answer those questions.
Mr. Preston.
Thank you, Mayor. Fortunately, for the sake of everyone's time, I had 4 questions, and Ms. Smith took the liberty of asking 3 of them, and Ms. Lorenz hit the 4th. So I will cede my time to next comment and moving on to the regular meeting.
You've been watching hearings, haven't you?
Well, I won't get into my questions, but for me, I have to take this moment to say some thank yous, just because I have kind of worked closely along with this. Number one, and plus I want this to be on the record, the level of professionalism, commitment, time, expertise, everything that has gone into this has not gone unnoticed. And so it is amazing, and I thank every last one of you, just from my own experience when I shared about the project. It was well known, our community was well known, and people were open to helping us and making sure that we succeeded, even though I know specifically 2 Chrissy grants that we went for, and were not able to get, sat in the room when we've gotten the bad news, have been there to get the feedback and receive it, and it never stopped our team. It never discouraged you all. You went back, you worked harder, and so we greatly, greatly appreciate that. Certainly to our state senator, our U.S. senators, and our U.S. representatives who worked diligently to help us get to this point. It has not gone unnoticed. The one thing that to just think about more so than a question I'll throw out there is, as we move forward, making sure, however we do the aesthetics, that we allow an opportunity for the community to share in their thoughts on what that will look like, because it would be great to be a true community space, if you will, where they've had the input to make sure we have what that looks like.
Thank you. I think we're going to take about a 10-minute break here. I think we're done. If there are more questions than that, certainly staff will be available after the meeting later tonight to answer those questions. And so let's take about a 10-minute break, and we'll start with the council meeting at 10 after 7.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Who do you work for?
I work for the town.
Okay, what's your position?
I'm the Public Works Director.
Okay, well, I haven't met you then.
Yeah, we met, Bucky, right?
Yeah.
Wayne Aldrich, yeah.
I
Yeah,
guess
this is
so.
probably years ago.
Sorry about that.
You gentlemen who spoke about your grandchildren? I completely understand.
Well, you know, that's a concern with me with all levels of government. It's not just a time. You know, I mean, I'm a conservative spender, but I don't spend money that I don't have. Now, if a necessity, if I fell ill, I might have to borrow the money to do whatever. But to take a vacation, I better have money in the bank. And what I look at with this is, it's not a necessity.
I hope you're hearing that for the rail passengers, we do have to have a solution.
But the railroad's been there for 100 years. Somehow, I mean, they're dealing with it now. I just have a problem with this borrowing money. You know, my grandchildren are not able to have a home, but they're the ones and I did help been a business we started in 1952. She built a house on Moncton in 1932.
Here's what I'm thinking about this, and part of why I'm leaning towards this, and I'm naturally fiscally conservative. I ride the train a lot. My daughter and my husband both went to see doctors up in Chicago, and what we do in this state is noticed by people who ride the train that don't stop here, that are going on to St. Louis or coming up from Texas, because the Texas Eagle comes up through here. And so I really think there is a opportunity wants to put a house in there. And that is not supposed to be
Put a turnstile on it.
You don't have a job. So I just said, you know what? I'll figure it out. Yeah. You know, but it's like,
everything's from there. It's the
Something like that,
but it's not just here. I tell people it's an industry.
I'm hoping that someday
She doesn't, but I don't.
There you go.
And I wish I could say I wish I did, but obviously I wish I did.
No, I know. No, I understand. Yeah, you're.
Wait for the long walk.
Yeah, I don't get
You have different classes.
Thank you for your comments.
Well, Reagan's going to eat leftovers tonight. I said, this is awful, invite a friend to come eat your leftovers.
I would too.
And the former president is his wife.
Oh, okay.
Isn't that fun? Two cats.
I would see him running on the trail, and so I said something to one. But it was one of those things where it was a fire. I going fast. Okay, right. I like the analogy. Goodness. I sleep a lot better than I
This was not talking. I can't pass notes.
I already did.
I think we're going to get started now.
Okay.
Come on, Sonia. Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for November 18th, 2019. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
Mrs. Cummings? Here. Mr. Nord?
Here.
Ms. Smith? Here. Mrs. Lorenz? Here. Mr. Preston?
Here.
We'll begin with a Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have no request for public comment. We'll move right on to the omnibus agenda items. Oh, I'm sorry, we do. We have a last-minute addition on public comment. Andrew, and I can't read your last name on this list. Andrew?
Oh, you can come forward.
Yeah.
Oh. Jeff Fritz, okay.
Good evening. My name's Andrew Cordes. I'm here to represent the Green Solution, who's the medical cannabis dispensary here in town. We've been doing business here since 2016. We just want to express our interest in converting that store to a dual-use license for adult use and medical cannabis. We think we've done a good job of serving the patients here in Normal, and we think we can be an economic driver for this town of Normal. We currently have been employing about 12 to 14 employees, and we plan on hiring at a minimum about 20. I don't really want to take too much of your guys' time, so I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to really look into this seriously. And if you have any questions for me as an operator in this industry, I'd be welcome to answer any questions.
Thank you. We may, at some point in the course of the evening. And Jeff Fritzen.
Jeff Fritzen, 114 Anthony Drive, Normal. Couple of things. One, I consider you the last line of defense. The state of Illinois has determined that recreational marijuana will be the law of the state. You can't do anything about that. But I think they also provided the option to opt out. They gave communities the option to opt out, which means they at least respect that communities can stand up for what they believe in and what they feel is best in the best interest of the citizens of their community. At the Planning Commission meeting, there were some people that spoke and said they represent others, and I'm pretty sure that was kind of anecdotal representation. I can tell you this, I was elected to the Normal Town Council 8 times. I have a constituency, and although I know that 100% of that constituency doesn't necessarily agree with me on this issue, I can guarantee a large majority of them do. And I can tell you, I do speak on the behalf of a lot of people who right now think probably public discourse on this is meaningless, that the die has already been cast, that they've given up, and you're the last line of defense. A few things I'd like to highlight. I've worked with the Bloomington Normal Community Campus Committee for several years. A group operating under the auspices of the BNCCC is a group called BN Parents. And they've been operating with a federal drug-free community grant for several years. It was recently renewed. A concern I have here is what statement do we as a community make to our junior and senior high school students, their parents, and those who have diligently been working against drug use if we welcome the recreational marijuana industry into our community? I also wanted to point out that the points I'm making, I don't have a lot of statistics, because a lot of people like to throw around statistics about Colorado, California, others. Those are fairly meaningless locally, and those things have not been proved yet. There's not been enough years really to prove those things. We don't have to fall in line with Springfield. Similar Illinois communities to ours have already opted out. Naperville, for instance, Decatur, others. In California, of all places, 80% of the municipalities in California, 80% chose to opt out. I think some people there know something about what may be down the road with this. As a home to higher education, a high concentration of young people in our community, I think it's important for us to be very restrictive, limit the availability, and the only way really that you can do that is by opting out. Opting in flies in the face of a lot of things this council has stood for over the last several years when it comes to the general health and welfare of our communities. The town banned indoor smoking in public places before it was a statewide thing. We increased the legal age for the purchase of tobacco to 21 before the state of Illinois implemented that. Through the BNCCC, we helped pass a keg registration ordinance to help lend control to large parties and the accessibility of beer in particular to underage people. There's been a commitment countywide to more effectively address mental health concerns. And this is proof that many of those mental health concerns include a drug use component. And so others in our community have expressed distress over the expansion of legalized gambling activities. And of course, the recent deaths and health concerns and outcomes related to vaping. So opting in flies in the face of those things that have already been done to try to be a positive influence on individuals. Law enforcement groups remain opposed to this. The ability to test for the influence is going to be a difficult thing for them to work through in the coming months and years. Regardless of additional local restrictions, expansion is always going to be promoted. One only has to look at gambling, and you see that where that's gone. And so, even back when the indoor smoking ban locally was implemented, we ended up with a hookah lounge. Short-lived, fortunately. But gambling proliferates, and in
Jeff,
California.
Sorry to do this, but you're
Yeah.
at the 5-minute mark now.
In California, there is a cannabis cafe. I know the state said no restaurant but expansion will be pushed once it's implemented. So I think clearly there are things that there are things that we can do. But the fact of the matter is, you are not the licensee or the distributor or the overseer of the license. The state is. And so your ability to restrict and respond to issues that are raised by the legalization of cannabis are limited. So the one thing you can do, though, is opt out. And I think that's the best vote for the town of Normal. Thank you.
That's everyone, right? We move to the omnibus agenda. Items considered routine and would be handled by one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. Ms. Smith?
I would like to pull item C and D.
Mr. Nord?
I would like to pull A, B, and E.
A, B, and E?
No, omnibus.
So we have no omnibus agenda tonight. First item is approval of the minutes of 3 meetings. Mr. Nord?
I so move.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Nord?
I just pulled this just for some public education. I'd asked Ms. Reese if she could just talk about the issue that happened last week and that the audio is now back up there because there was a lot of talk.
Sure. 2 weeks ago, during the city council meeting, there was some technical challenges on getting the live stream uploaded to YouTube. And the first few minutes of the public, I don't know exactly how long, but the first few minutes of the public commenters were not recorded by video. They were, however, recorded by audio, and we were able to get the audio from one of the local radio stations. They shared their audio with us, and so the audio portion is available on the town's website, the same page that you would access to see the video. So,
Thank you. So those that were looking for it, it wasn't there before, but it is now, so please go back and look now. So thank you.
Again, this is approval of minutes of the special meeting of October 31st, 2019, approval of the minutes of the special meeting of November 1st, 2019, and approval of the minutes of the regular council meeting of November 4th, 2019. Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. Item B is a report to receive and file Town of Normal expenditures for payment as of November 13th, 2019. Mr. Nord?
I so move.
Second.
Mr. Nord?
I just have a request. After looking through a lot of these expenses, there's a lot of dirt that the town buys from other vendors. And it's going across several different departments. I would just request that on some of the projects that we do, we're excavating dirt and paying for it to be hauled off. Maybe pile it somewhere, so that way instead of us buying, we can just use material that we already have. So that's just my request to look into that.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
One thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to be excused from any votes on bills that I've incurred.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. Item B is approved. Item C is a resolution to authorize change of hotel franchise at 8 Trader Circle from Radisson to Holiday Inn. Ms. Smith?
I moved to this resolution to change the hotel franchise name.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you.
And I had contacted Ms. Reese with my questions, but I still am looking for some clarification here. So as I understand it, the original agreement for the TIF funding was tied to the franchise as a Radisson, and that to continue to be eligible for the TIF reimbursement, we must now approve the change from Radisson to Holiday Inn. That's the action we're taking today?
That is correct.
And in clarifying the TIF expenses for this project, what is eligible for TIF reimbursement are only the hotel taxes and not property taxes, correct?
No, I don't believe that is correct. I'm looking at Mr. Day. I think they are eligible for the TIF increment. which is
Correct.
based
Yeah,
off
there's
the property
two
taxes.
incentive streams here. One is the hotel tax, and the other is the reimbursement of their expenses under the TIF district. So the tax increment that they're generating from the TIF district up to their eligible expenses.
Oh, so there are two separate reimbursements.
Correct.
And the amount that's eligible is 11.2 million, but to date, it's around 82,000.
That is correct. They have been reimbursed to date about $82,000. Their TIF eligible expenses when they did their project equated to about 11.2 million is my recollection.
Okay. And you had provided me with their current EAV of 1.58 million. How much of an increase is that because of the remodeling that they did when they converted to the Radisson initially?
You know, Ms. Smith, I'm not sure because I didn't look at their baseline EAV. I just looked at their current. I'm going to take a quick look at Mr. Hune and see if he happens to remember what their baseline EAV was, and I'm going to go with no on that one. So we would have to look that up. I'm not sure.
But that would not come out of the TIF until 2031?
The
Well-
TIF expires in 2031.
2031.
if that's
So
what you're asking.
as the EAV grows, then by 2031, the full value would be achieved, would be seen by all the taxing bodies.
And the reimbursement for the hotel taxes expires at that time as well?
I believe so.
Okay.
Does the hotel motel tax go all the way till 2031, Mr. Day?
Now, let me look real
I don't
quick here.
recall.
84
I don't think it does.
I'm sorry, hello?
No, yeah, it expires before that. It's 84 months
Oh.
after they started
Much-
operation.
Much before that, yes.
Okay. That's all I had. Thanks. It was a little confusing.
Yes.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. Item C is approved. Item D is a resolution authorizing a contract change order with Hare Construction Incorporated for sanitary sewer repairs on Locust Street in the amount not to exceed $96,210. Ms. Smith?
I move this item forward.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Ms. Smith?
Okay, and again, to get it into the record, this is a change order necessitated by the collapse of a section of the sewer. And it's actually, the amount that we're looking at is a time and materials estimate that includes $78,000 for 702 feet of sewer pipe lining and repair, which seems like a real bargain, actually, for 702 feet, and a contingency of nearly $18,000 for any possible collapse or other problems that might occur. But according to your documents, there is a distinct possibility that they may actually come in under what we're approving tonight, correct?
That is true. That has happened with this contractor in the past when they have been televising sewers, and we have a contract with Hair Construction to televise the sewers. And part of the value of them doing this is discovering problems like we're presented with tonight, a collapsed sewer. So in the past, they were able to repair the sewer in less time and less materials than expected, and so there was some savings.
And the projected time frame is just 4 days?
Correct.
And the cold weather doesn't impact that estimate?
No, that is accurate. Should council approve this contract tonight as we request, we anticipate here getting started with the project, I think the Friday after Thanksgiving.
This Friday?
This Friday.
Friday.
This Friday.
And you indicated in the notes to the council that funding is coming from budget savings of $137,000, which there would still be some dollars remaining in those budget savings. Where do those go if they're not spent?
They remain in the sanitary sewer fund. That's an enterprise fund.
Okay. That's all I have.
Mr. Nord?
A question on why we're not bidding this out versus why we're just going to give it to the contractor there. Is this, you had said that this was, or I guess in this document it says that this is an emergency repair. What qualifies it as an emergency repair, as an emergency repair that we do not get bids on versus when we do get bids?
Well, in this particular instance, we are considering this collapsed sewer because it has already failed as an emergency repair. The risk is, if we don't consider this an emergency repair and move forward, the risk is that there could be additional collapse of the sewer main. It could generate a collapse of the street above it, because as things collapse below the pavement, we don't want the pavement to have a sinkhole or collapse. So we think there's a lot of risk by delaying. If we chose to bid this project, it could be a 4 to 6 week delay by the time we issue bid specifications, get bids, analyze the bids, and come back to council, because council only meets twice a month. So it could be 4 to 6 weeks before we could have an issue back here at the table. So we consider this an emergency repair. Part of the value of moving forward with Hair Construction is they are already mobilized, so we do believe that that also benefits in terms of the cost savings of potentially another contractor coming in.
And is staff pretty comfortable that the cost they're proposing is something that would be in line with costs if we were to bid it out?
We actually believe that there's a good chance this could be lower than if we bid it out.
Okay.
Because of them being on site already.
Thank you.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. Item D is approved. Item E is a resolution authorizing a contract extension with Cardinal Infrastructure LLC for professional services related to federal advocacy and funding. Mr. Nord.
I so move.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Nord.
This contract, we've got the Underpass funds that have been approved. What projects are they working on for future funding?
Should council authorize this contract extension with Cardinal, we will continue to use their services for the build grant, for administering the US DOT grant program. We will also use their services to help us explore other grant funding opportunities for the underpass project. And we are hopeful that they might be able to assist us in identifying potential sources for other projects such as West College and other capital investments in projects that we have, so.
Okay. Are we extending this contract, or are we just taking it out to, is it March of next year when it should have been signed to? Is that what we're doing? Or are we extending it further?
Well, we're considering this as a contract out through March of 2021, I believe. Is that what the
Is that
date
what
that
it
we
said
had on
further
it?
in here?
I forgot the date.
Oh, it says the
20
proposed,
March of 2020.
So
And then
then-
at that point, if we feel that there's value to consider another extension, we would come back to council.
okay, because we're not, well, just for my understanding, this work is already being done. The contract should have been signed, but for some reason it got overlooked, so we're not extending anything. We're still going to reevaluate a new contract come March of 2020.
Well, technically, the contract did expire, so this would be an extension of the one that has expired and taking us through spring of 2020.
Okay. We've been with this vendor since 2002. How often do we do like a vendor refresh and look at other vendors? I'm not saying this vendor's not doing their job. I'm just curious, do we ever look at other people?
In this particular instance involving uptown development and the use of the application of Tiger grants, Chrissy grants, and Build grants for various developments, we have used CHG Consulting initially, starting in 2002, and then I believe in 2000, I'm not sure which year it switched from CHD to Cardinal. So we have used
Basically the same firm.
Right. We have used them for quite a while, as you've indicated. We don't have a specific formula on when we will go out for professional services RFPs. In this particular instance, the projects that we've been working on have been multi-year projects. So we have not felt like stopping in mid-project and trying to do an RFP for additional services. And our success rate with Cardinal has been pretty good so far.
I would add that Cardinal is very focused on transportation infrastructure and has quite a bit of knowledge about the workings of US DOT, which is very important. They are definitely not a contract lobbyist that, whatever you're working on, will work with you. They're very focused on transportation issues.
Have they helped us with any road projects?
We've not done a road project other than Uptown.
Uptown roads.
Yeah. I got it. Ms. Cummings.
I just would like to add to something to what you mentioned, Mayor, just from my own dealings as well with Ms. Graves, and knowing outside of just what we've known of her, when I have interacted with different areas, they'll ask the question, who are we working with? And when I bring up, Cardinal, they are well respected. And I don't know if people understand when you work with a group, it is very important that they're favored upon as well within DC in order to get things done. We can go out and we can try to contract other people or make it or look for the lesser option, if you will. But it does not mean that they have built the relationships or that they have the name recognition that will get your foot in the door in these rooms that we need to be in order to be successful as a community. And so it's been a pleasure to be able to say that we're connected with Cardinal Infrastructure, who has a well-known name within DC and is well-respected and can help us get their foot in the door. And you are absolutely right. Their focus has been very beneficial to us in the things we're trying to accomplish. So I would strongly support us are continuing our relationship.
I would add too that they're, as a firm, are quite frugal. They're
Yes.
very low overhead operating company. Their prices are incredibly competitive when you look at other firms that do this kind of work, and they deliver. They get the job done. Mr. Preston.
Thanks. Just a follow-up question that, in response to what Mr. Nord had asked, have we asked Cardinal, I guess, how they approach other clients of theirs, if it is always on what I, would perceive as kind of a monthly retainer compared to being project-specific, Underpass, and, that then, regardless of length of time, and then second to how they operate with other clients, do we have a good feel for how the industry overall does it? I mean, if we were to go out and put an RFP together, would everybody come back and say monthly retainer compared to, do this work, pay this amount?
Most often, firms like that work on monthly retainers because, as was pointed out earlier, they're multi-year projects in that. Now, I think they do have some clients that they do a special project with once and out, but most of their major clients they've had for as long as we've had them. San Antonio, Salt Lake City are clients, and they're retainer clients. Further on this item? Mr. Nord.
You may have answered this already, but to be clear, when we vote on this, we're just voting up to March 2020, and then we have a chance to look at the actual contract next year, right? Okay.
Correct. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We have two items of general orders tonight. The first is an ordinance amending the Town of Normal zoning code to regulate adult-use cannabis facilities. Motion for approval.
Move approval.
Thank you. Thank you. Comments?
Yes, Mayor and Council, I'm going to invite Mercy Davison and Greg Trummel to come forward. They have been active in preparing the draft ordinance and working with the Planning Commission through this process. They've also been through the public hearing process and will be prepared to have a brief discussion and answer any questions council might have. This is not unlike what we presented to you a month or so ago in terms of your consideration. So, Ms. Davison?
Thank you. Yes, as I put into the report, we had the Planning Commission meeting back on November 7th, and we had several members of the public come in and testify.
Mercy, can you use the microphone a little bit more?
Oh, yeah.
Make sure it's on.
Yes, I might move this a little bit and scoot
Thank
this
you.
way. Sure. So the Planning Commission had its hearing back on November 7th. We had several members of the public available to testify. I kind of described how that went in the report. Because the proposed ordinance is very long and there are a lot of different components to it, the Planning Commission chose to break it down into major segments just so that their recommendation would be clear to you. So I hope it is clear in the report. I'll just hit some of the highlights, and then really we probably would just be available for questions. They did vote first on the issue of whether the town should opt in or opt out, just prohibit it altogether or permit various types of cannabis businesses with regulations. They did vote to opt in. Following that, not surprisingly, they also voted to require that all of these cannabis business types require a special use permit. And special use permits require going before the Zoning Board of Appeals for a recommendation, and then it would come to the town council for a final decision. The Zoning Board of Appeals matters are treated pretty much the same as Planning Commission in that we publish notice in the paper, we send out notice to property owners within a certain distance, we put a sign on the property so that there's a pretty decent opportunity for people to weigh in. So if someone wanted to open any cannabis-related business, we would have to go through that public process every time. That's what the Planning Commission recommended. They also looked at the types of zoning districts in which you could have these businesses, and that really didn't change very much from what you saw the first time around during a work session. Dispensaries, which is where the retail sales would happen, they were supportive of that happening in B1 general business only. The twist on that is that they did like the idea of excluding the zone that is closest to the ISU campus. So even with the buffers that they recommended, there would still be some B1 properties pretty close to ISU campus. And they agreed that it would be nice to just exclude that area. So as it's shown on your map, there would basically be an exclusion zone south of Gregory down to Division, roughly along the Main Street corridor. They also, because there is B1 zoning for all three of our mobile home parks, they recommended that those also just be excluded altogether. You couldn't, regardless of the fact that it's B1, you couldn't have a dispensary there. They looked at the buffers that we recommended. They pretty much went along with that, which again was very similar to what you saw back a few weeks ago. The one change that they made is that the buffer of 100 feet from those specific types of land uses, they narrowed it down to just places of public worship, daycares, and schools. They took nursing homes out. So that's really about the only difference there. They stuck with the 200-foot buffer from single-family residential properties. There were some other miscellaneous provisions that we talked about the last time, but I feel like those are the highlights from the Planning Commission. So we'd be available for any questions you might have.
Questions? Ms. Cummings?
Yes, so I do have a couple questions, and I don't know if you all can help me. And this is something that has kind of been on my mind. Because for me, there's two things that are important. Number one, I don't want us to put ourselves in a position where we exclude a current business. But the other thing is, interestingly, and it might be falling on you, Mr. Day, to help me with this. If I remember correctly, at IML, they talked about the possibility of having grant funds for community colleges who may partake, I guess, in some type of horticulture program that would include cannabis. If they do that, and say, for instance, Heartland decides they want to participate, would we then have to make sure that we have the appropriate zoning set for them to take that on?
No, the provisions relating to community college research would fall outside of the types of facilities that would come under our zoning control. So that would be, community colleges would be able to do this despite our zoning.
Mr. Nord?
Do you have the map that you presented us that you could put on screen?
I have 3 maps. There were so many possible maps that we could have brought this evening. I brought the map that's in your packet, which reflects the Planning Commission recommendation. We also brought the map that had been discussed, that the broader buffers that the city of Bloomington was looking at a few weeks ago. So I don't know which version are you
one that's
talking
in our
about?
packet.
From the
Oh, well,
packet,
there
I
you
see.
go. Then yes, I do have that. All right, that's it.
Yeah. Close to ISU, there's a couple locations that are in red that could be potential locations. I don't know if you can zoom in, but it seems like we were trying to get away from allowing this in Uptown, but we've got properties that isn't Uptown that it would be allowed.
So you're talking about the 2 B1 properties that are on the east side of Uptown?
They're down on Linden. If you zoom in on Linden, like by the police department.
I'm gonna have to say that the normal zooming icon.
I think that would be my business, Mr. Nord.
Well, no, well, yeah, I think it is, but it's in that area.
Right.
You know, are we trying to, I thought we were trying to exclude stuff close to campus.
Well, prior to the Planning Commission, I didn't get any sense of that. I know there was concern about that, but, oh, thank you. Look at that. While she is doing that. Going into Planning Commission, though, we didn't have that as a specific recommendation, and the Planning Commission itself was very dialed in on the Main Street corridor as being really close to the ISU campus. They didn't seem to be bothered by the couple of properties that you're talking about. That's not to say you might not be concerned about it, but the properties, as Mindy's bringing this up, is basically the building where Vitesse is and then the building where Wild Country is. Wild Country still has B1 zoning. It has for a long time.
I knew that was going to happen.
That's okay. But those are the two properties out that you're talking about.
Sure, so I would kind of like to look at that because that also means then if there's another property that somebody rezones later to B1, then they now would potentially be able to sell marijuana. And there were lots of folks that had contacted, at least myself, saying, hey, we don't want this in Uptown. And I'm trying to kind of respect that because once we put the zoning out, it's hard to make it tighter. You know, so that was a concern that I would like to see.
Actually, because it
addressed.
is a special use permit, we do have the opportunity to do that. So it's not by right zoning because it's a special use permit.
So as a special use permit, I don't know that the only there are criteria where you can say, this area is special for this, that, or the other reason, things in the vicinity, so you can increase the regulations on how they build it or how they operate it. I don't know if you could go so far as to say it's B1 zoning, but because it's a special use, we're actually going to turn it down in this location. I haven't seen that happen, but would it be possible?
You couldn't just say no flat out, you just don't want it there. I mean, you'd have to have a justifiable reason why it doesn't meet the standards that you're looking at for that particular property.
Sure, so I would like that looked at then. Another question is, when looking at the different zoning types, or the different zoning for the different types of marijuana businesses, if someone's going to be an infuser, so they're going to bake, in order for them to transport it, from my understanding, they also have to have a transporter's license, which means the transporter's license can only be in an M1 or M2, which now if you bake your own goods, you can't put it in a car and take it to wherever you're going to sell it. Am I reading that right?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Day on that, because that's a state licensing
Right,
issue.
yeah, the state's got different types of facilities, and they, being the state of Illinois, they make as many different licenses as they can. So there's the transporter license, along with the infuser license. There was one change in the recommendation from the Planning Commission with respect to infusers. They expanded the zoning districts from just B1 also to M1 and M2. But, yeah, infusers wouldn't have the transporter license. Now, transporters, that doesn't mean they can't drive into a B1. It just means that the transporter facilities could be located in M1. But you wouldn't stop them from, it doesn't mean they can't drive the product into a B1 district.
Well, from my understanding, they can't transport product unless they have the transporter's license,
So you're saying that the infuser business cannot be transporting their own product?
unless they have the transporter license.
Correct. Yes. There is the small caveat that we've got that a craft grower, an infuser, and a dispensary can co-locate within a B1. Part of the reason that the state statute allows that is probably for the transportation issue that you're talking about, that they can co-locate. Not only the dispensary can sell, but the infuser and the craft grower could be located in the same facility.
Okay. Another question is, do we have any projections as to how much tax revenue this business could potentially generate for the town?
No, we do not.
Do we know?
We have not made any estimates or made any conclusions about a potential revenue stream on that.
Okay, so it could be $50,000. We just have no idea. Okay.
Correct.
And then do we know what the average ticket is? So we can maybe estimate how many people we're looking at coming in?
What do you mean by average ticket?
Sale. Like an average sale.
Oh, like a
You know, as an average sale,
No idea.
$100. Because then we can kind of equate, if they're saying it's going to be $50,000, we can gauge how many people are coming in to our community and things like that. Because where I'm going with it is if we're only looking at, say, 50 grand, and this is just an arbitrary number, and the reality is the bulk of any issue that's going to come up because of it is going to be handled by the police department. So if they have to hire one more police officer, are we getting enough revenue to offset the expense? So I don't know that. I would like to know that. Another question I have is, we're trying to create the zoning so that way the existing medical dispensary can sell recreationally. Well, there's no bus service that goes up there. So have we talked to Connect to see if they will provide a bus to go up there as well? Because that could be something that the dispensary may say, hey, you know, even though you allow it, we can't get some customers there, and they may still choose to go elsewhere.
Mr.
No, we haven't.
Mr. Nerd, we have not spoken with Connect Transit about that. That would generally be between a business and Connect, but we could certainly have that conversation. I would suggest we have that conversation then with lots of small to medium-sized businesses, because we generally don't ask business owners if they need transit service. So if we were going to start that as a practice and make that part of a small business conversation, then we can do that moving forward.
Oh, that would be great, because Mr. Thorne actually has asked that would happen. So that would be great if, you know, we could get him involved too, because he's requested that.
Mr. Nord, I'm going to ask you to hold. I'll come back to you. There are other people that want to speak on this issue. Mr. McCarthy?
Sure. Where did my notes go? There they went. So over the course of the last month, I've had the opportunity to speak with business owners, residents. We've gotten a lot of emails, some students. I was able to talk to a neighborhood association, a little bit with our police, and spoke with 2 members of our planning commission from their meeting, trying to get as smart as I could about this, and spent a fair amount of time on the CDC website, who has some interesting information on there as well. 2 parts to this, Mary. I'll try to keep it pretty brief, sorry. There was a lot of questions out there about what this really is and what we're really doing about it. And so a couple of things I want to clear up, and then I do have a couple of questions. Probably the biggest question, the most prevalent question I got is about personal use. I just want to say it one more time, is we're not regulating personal use here. The state of Illinois has done that, and come January 1st, personal use of cannabis in the town of Normal, actually in the entire state, is legal, and we're not considering that tonight. We don't have any say over that. We're only here regulating the business licenses that have been discussed already and are in our packet. Quality of place concerns and public use concerns was brought up prevalently in all these conversations. Just like alcohol, you're not going to be able to drink it in the streets of Normal. You're not going to be able to use it in the streets of Normal and public spaces. Brings up some interesting conversations about our smoke-free environments for landlords who have those policies in their buildings that would prevent people who rent from them from personal use in their space if those landlords in fact have no smoking policies in their apartments. It's an interesting quandary for those folks. Proximity concerns, closeness, the differences between what's included and what's not. You guys have been pretty clear on pointing that out tonight. Thank you for doing that. The questions moving on, for me, in talking with the Planning Commission around the buffers, and I was able to get a copy of some of your other maps. Thank you for putting those together. I asked them about their consideration of the 200, 100 zones, and both members of the Planning Commission that I spoke to were focused in mostly on the ISU zone and Heartland Community College area and the zoning around that, and seeking to try to limit in that area, and felt that they were more stringent in those areas to try to keep access in our 2 major campuses in our community, and is why they didn't address wider buffer zones elsewhere in the community. And I felt that was a good, strong consideration. And you may have asked her this one already, Mr. Day. I believe this question is for you. Is in the special use permit process, will we be able to vary from buffer zones during that process? So in other words, if we have a potential B1 licensee that wants to go in and we say, you know, actually that's a little closer than to whatever one of the protected classes is, can we expand that, or are we restricted to the ordinance language?
We would have to be very careful in expanding that, I think. There would have to be a significant legally defensible reason for doing that. I can't, off the top of my head, imagine a scenario where that would happen, but.
Okay.
Let me ask that in a different way. I think my understanding would be that if we were to change a buffer, it would have to be for the entire community, that we couldn't, it would be kind of like spot zoning if we were to do it on particular.
Right, part of the purpose of a special use is you look at that particular property in conjunction with that particular use, and there are certain conditions that you can put on a use for that property. That's part of the whole hearing process. Typically for buffers, I haven't really seen it. Again, theoretically, it's possible, but we'd want to make very, very sure that we were doing it for a legally justifiable reason, not just we think you should be 500 feet instead of 200 feet from this particular house, kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay. And our ordinance, again, a legal question, just to make sure and this is more for some public education in mind. Our ordinance is covering all of the classes of licenses that the state issues.
That's correct.
Okay. That's it for now. Thank you.
Mr. Preston.
Thanks, Mayor. So question for staff, wondering if there was much consideration given, and if so, why staff decided to take all of the cannabis-related business types and, really kind of propose them as one, while the zoning that each would be required to be located in varies. All of the business types are, as proposed, would be allowed with a special use permit rather than, a certain type not being permitted at all. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, well, we were comfortable at the staff level, given the state law, in having, any of these operate in normal with their appropriate state licenses if they meet our ordinance. So at no point did staff talk about, kind of cherry picking which uses we may or may not want in normal, but we did expect that might come up at the Planning Commission. And it really didn't. I mean, as far as someone saying like, well, we should just not have dispensaries at all, but we're okay with cultivation centers or processing centers. I mean, that certainly is an option. We talked about whether that would even be permissible, and Mr. Day thought, yeah, we could probably do that. We just feel like if they're regulated appropriately, they should be fine. Like any of them should be fine. But again, we wouldn't have been surprised if it would have come up at the public hearing. It didn't really. I mean.
Okay. Yeah, my thought actually being maybe in reverse to the example that you used there. A lot of the proponents of this that I've heard from at least deal with access to consumers, and the dispensary is the one business here, unless I'm mistaken, that actually directly deals with that. That is also the one business here that we can add a municipal, local home rule sales tax to, that on, your cultivation center, your processor. I'm just weighing in my mind, what is the benefit to the town of Normal and to the people of Normal, with the obvious exception of capitalism and just not, over-regulating business, in allowing those versus not. And, we've heard some concerns about some of the draft of odor as well, and just kind of playing all that out. I didn't know if there was any more to that conversation between the types of businesses.
Well, we did speak about, even when the medical cannabis stuff came around a few years ago, that, there's a very good chance that those sorts of businesses would locate in currently unoccupied space in the community, which would be good to, use kind of warehouse-ish space that we already have. I don't know how many, clearly some of these are just being built from scratch, but when you start having infusers or processors, it's very possible they could find existing square footage in the community, which I think would be a positive to use some of these buildings. As far as odor goes, we definitely talked about that, and with all, the special use does give you the flexibility to really drill into that in the public hearing and say, we want you to show us what your odor control mechanisms are, we want you to show us that this works, give us your whatever spec sheets and testimonials, because that is probably, of all the issues we talked about behind the scenes, odor, it's probably one of the biggest. But we think that can be adequately controlled through the special use permit process.
Okay. And then a question probably for Ms. Reese, following up with Mr. Nord's question, what would it take for us to have projections? Is that something that we could do with any amount of confidence, put together revenue projections on this? Because it is kind of hard to make a decision on something, especially if there's a tax associated with it, without having any kind of revenue projection.
Well, it is hard also because we don't even know if there will be one in Normal. There's such a limited quantity of dispensaries in 2-county area. We might get one. And so, our estimate would be very much a ballpark. We just don't know at this point. So we could probably come up with a ballpark number, but we really are uncomfortable budgeting for it or planning on it because of the complete unknowns of what the future brings.
Ms. Smith and then Ms. Lorenz.
I would defer to Ms. Lorenz because I took the wind out of her sails asking her questions.
Thank you. I'll try not to do the same then. I don't really have any questions. I just want to give a comment to the many emails that I have received and input from residents, and clarify, remind us all what we are, and more importantly, what we are not doing here. What we are doing, I think, is best summarized in our report. Maybe it's actually for the report for the Planning Commission. We are adopting zoning regulations to regulate business establishments in this area of business. What we are doing is designating certain land use and separation requirements for this kind of business. That's what we are doing. It's no different in a way than some of those other, maybe you want to call them sin-type businesses, be it video gambling, be it an establishment that has a liquor license. To the commenter earlier that talked about the municipality being the last line of defense, it's an interesting point of view. However, I think really the last line of defense is with the individual consumer. And so I think what we as a community can do more than anything, and what we have done, a proven track record, is take businesses like those seeking liquor licenses and the video gambling, and write the strictest regulation and ordinance we can come up with. And I want to commend the staff for doing their research and basically doing just that. And, it's to me, the last line of defense is really with the individual. And I'll share a personal story that some may already know, but the disease of alcoholism runs through my family. My father struggled with it and died at an early age. My brother, who's 60-some years old, struggles with it and to this day is still recovering alcoholic somewhere in South Carolina. When I am with him, I become keenly aware of every drinking establishment that we go past. I become keenly aware when we go to dinner together, when we walk past a bar. That is really difficult on him, but he's learned to work with it. And so what I don't want to do is pick which vice is allowed or not allowed in this community. Because maybe your vice is drinking too much, and walking past an establishment that allows that is really, really hard. So I want to be business friendly, and I want us to be thoughtful about the safety of our community. And I think striking a balance of allowing this to happen, but with the strictest land use regulation and zoning regulations is the way to go. So thank you.
Ms. Smith?
I understand the concern about trying to wrap our heads around the amount of revenue we might be generating from encouraging a business like this. And in discussions with Ms. Reese, she indicated that the state will not share individual business revenue information with us, and God bless them for having some privacy policies in place. But as an accountant, if you consider the fact that this is a business establishment with 14 employees that are paid, I would assume, above minimum wage, and that benefits are easily an additional 30% of their compensation package, and that most businesses seek to do more than simply cover the cost of those employees, I would consider that this is in fact a successful business. And the gentleman from the Green Solution has indicated that he is interested, the business is interested in adding a recreational dispensary capability at the same location, which would give them the ability to have economies of scale in a single location and go to potentially 20 employees. So again, to consider being business friendly, what I keep coming back to is the fact that Bloomington increased their gas taxes before the state passed it. We did not follow suit, and yet the price of gas in Normal
Is the same.
kept pace with Bloomington gas stations.
Yes, it
At present, the medical dispensary at the Green Solution is only collecting the state 1.75% sales tax because it is treated as a medicine, so that we have the capability to collect this. The recreational dispensary is the only opportunity to collect local sales taxes of these business options. And for me, the overriding concern is here is an opportunity for people to voluntarily increase what they pay to us by using something that they choose to use. And I have heard comments made about in Colorado, it is not paying for itself because the cost of the addiction treatment is not offset by the revenues. But in a conference call with a representative from Colorado with the Green Solution, she was pointing out that is not an accurate statement because the proceeds are directed towards opioid addiction treatment. And so it is not keeping pace with that. And so to counter some misinformation that is being put forth, I wanted to be sure that got on record. And I too think we need to be business friendly because this is a business that is doing well, that wants to expand. The only question I have is they're 98 feet from a church. So even with this new change, would it be possible for us to still approve the addition of recreational dispensary and allow them to continue to be just 98 feet?
Yes, in your ordinance, there is a grandfather for the existing Green Solution where it's 75 feet for anybody that is currently a licensed medical marijuana facility.
Okay, that's it.
I'll add to your gas analogy. We had monitored gas prices, and the cheapest gas is always in Bloomington, not in Normal. Mr. Nord.
To ask a few more questions about the zoning. Agriculture, they cannot transport as well. They're not allowed by zoning. So our zoning rules, they extend out, what, a mile or 2 miles past the town? So-
Our subdivision control goes out 1.5 miles, but not our zoning code.
Okay, so like a local farmer, if they wanted to grow, they could still, if they got a transporter's license, do that. If they were, well, outside of city limits.
They would be subject to the county's zoning requirements. If they were within our 1.5 miles, we would have subdivision. We would be able to require that they subdivide the property that they're developing, but we wouldn't, the zoning would still have to be in place per the county. And the county hasn't taken any action on this yet, so I don't know how that's gonna go.
Okay, just
And
because
for-
ours is
Just
ag.
for clarification, when we talk about agriculture and the farmers, there won't be actual farmers growing
Right.
fields of marijuana. This would have to be the cultivation center, which would be a big warehouse with all of the growing activities indoors.
Sure, and a
So-
cultivation center by our zoning cannot transport their own product.
No, and under state law, it's not under our zoning, it's
Right.
under the state statute that they have to have a transporter.
Well, by our zoning, according to this graph or this chart, if they are a cultivation center in an ag district, they cannot transport their own, if they have their own transporter's license.
Well, that's a transporter facility. That's a facility, so if you're the cultivation center, that's the warehouse where they're going to keep their trucks and keep the product that they're moving from cultivation center to dispensary. It's not a limitation on their ability to transport across zoning districts.
It's not across zoning districts. The license, there's a separate license for being a craft grower, a cultivation center, and a transporter. Each one is separate.
Right.
You can only transport your own product or transport any product if you are a transporter. That's the way that I'm understanding it. So, for example, like I mentioned earlier, if you're an infuser, you cannot transport your own product that you made to like the dispensary to sell for you.
That's
So-
correct. Under state law, you'd have to go through a transporter.
But by our zoning, if you're in B1, you cannot have a transporter's license.
So I don't know, and is it clear to you in the state law whether like a cultivation center could have a license to be a cultivation center and have a license to be a transporter? Is that what you're asking, so that,
Well, it's not the state law. I mean, that's the way that I understand it from the state law, but by our zoning, if you're going to be, say, an infuser, okay, you bake things and you're going to infuse some of the stuff with marijuana, you can do that in B1. A transporter, you cannot be a transporter in B1. So if that infuser wants to put their stuff in their car, take it to a dispensary to sell, because an infuser cannot sell, they have to hire an outside transporter company to do that.
Right. They do. And I think you might be confusing the job description with the facility. It's a transporter facility is what
Right.
we're zoning.
The transporting business.
Right. Think of like a
Not actually their service.
Nussbaum, if Nussbaum were to convert to,
So if an infuser gets a transporter's license,
don't
can
think
they do
they
that
can.
in B1?
know that they can
Yeah.
get a transporter's license. I think that's a separate state license that,
problem.
So an infuser
State
cannot
is
get a
keeping
second
separate.
transporter's license.
it is our understanding, at least my understanding, that if you are a craft grower, a cultivator, any of those uses, and you want your product transported, you would pay a licensed transporter to do the transporting for you. And that transporter is going to have their facility in either M1 or M2 per this version of the code. Because it would be it would be like a trucking warehouse shipping kind of thing, which would be appropriate in an industrial zoning district. So we wouldn't want basically a trucking firm to be in B1 zoning, generally speaking. If the state were to permit a small craft grower to transport their own product all over the place and they were doing it in their personal vehicle, that would be a separate issue altogether. We're talking about transporter facilities.
Yeah, but I'm talking transport a sheet of brownies.
Yeah, I don't know that the
I
state
mean,
law permits
literally
that.
that. I mean,
I think that's a state law issue. I don't
Okay.
think, that's not what our zoning code is attempting to address at all.
okay,
No.
because a baker, according to our zoning, cannot have a transporter's license to do the same thing.
No.
But anyway, so I'm stepping I'm stepping away from that now. When I was reading this, it says we have till April to decide. Is that accurate? The state's given us.
That's on the next item. The April is the sales tax issue. That's the
Okay.
next agenda item.
The sales tax, but we have to make a decision on whether we're going to opt in or opt out by the end of the year.
January 1st, right?
Have we talked to
In
the
terms of
schools?
dispensaries?
What have our schools said about this, about our zoning?
I do not know. I mean, this has been out in the public for so long. No one from a school district has called me specifically. I don't know if any of you have been contacted, but I would not assume that they don't know that this is going on.
Well, I mean, are they happy with the zoning change that we're proposing, is my question. I'm not asking whether or not they think we should allow marijuana, just.
They've been silent on it, so my assumption is they're
No idea.
Okay.
not happy or unhappy.
I would like us to, I mean, this is a decision that affects Bloomington and Normal together. I would request that we have like a joint meeting with Bloomington and Normal and see if we can't come up with some sort of zoning rules that will work well together, because at our borders, if we're not the same, say on like, Vernon and Tawanda Avenue, Bloomington Normal cross right there, if we're not the same and one town really doesn't want something there and the other one does, we're gonna have some clashes. And for something that's gonna affect both Bloomington and Normal, I'd like to see us kind of coordinate with them and do everything together, or, either opt in together or opt in not. That would be a request. And then one other question about the map. Would you address some of these apartment complexes, big apartment complexes, are not, I guess, blackened out?
Mm-hmm.
How come some are and some are not?
The way this map is drawn, all the darkest gray is anything zoned R1 and then 200 feet from it. So it's not buffering from anything zoned R2 or R3, which is what you're talking about, would be apartment complexes.
The apartment complexes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, which
So
I
there
just.
shouldn't be any, all apartment complexes are not shown in dark gray on here.
I think indirectly, Mr. Nord, some apartment properties are caught by an R1 buffer, just by proximity.
Yeah,
But
not because
but
they were
straight
there.
up conventional multiple family zoning is not buffered.
Okay, so then we could have a dispensary right next to an apartment complex, according to this
Yes,
proposed zoning.
Yes.
it's possible, yes.
Okay.
Further on this item? Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah. Odor's been brought up a couple of times. Has there been any discussion about, I don't even know if this scenario is possible, so I'm going to float an example and you can tell me whether it's realistic or not, or if there's been discussion on it, but the strip mall example of a cannabis business on one end, I'm assuming there's some code provisions about HVAC systems and odor going across the buildings through HVAC systems and all of that, have we?
Yeah, and again, that gets to maybe some of the town layers of a special use consideration in a multi-tenant building. I guess the best thing I could liken it to in recent history was the Central Illinois shooting range.
Yeah.
Which is part of now it's a large piece of property, but it's in a multi-tenant building. And the town, the council set that up to be a special use process. That was very much a big part of it. They have a very elaborate ventilation system, a noise system, but they're all very performance-based. And so, even though you can put those types of measures in place, it's not to necessarily say it's going to be a guarantee until you actually have some experience.
Right.
So, but certainly as part of the special use process, depending on the proximity, and I think it goes back to Mr. Day and Ms. Davison's comments about, you can consider special use provisions maybe beyond what the state requires in the way of basics for separation. Maybe it's more landscaping, maybe it's different types of signage, maybe it's different lighting and those types of things, and maybe it could be, expanded, or you're not sharing mechanical systems in some fashion like that. So very, very site specific.
Okay, so we have that ability at our code level to help remedy any of those situations if they become problematic when we go forward. Okay. Last question, and you may have addressed this by giving us the draft ordinance, and this might be a moot question, but are you guys okay from your perspective on the buffer
Yeah, I think we're comfortable enough, again, I think it's been referenced several times, is that, the gaming separation, the liquor license separation. There's always going to be these moving chess pieces with whether it's principally probably churches. Schools tend to be a little more stationary.
Right.
And a little more permanent. However, we've had some schools that were located in church properties that have since moved, since this whole discussion even started. So, yeah, I think we're comfortable with it. Again, we've tried to walk the straight line, not necessarily advocating one way or another, but.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Smith?
Just to clarify for Mr. Nord, the number of dispensaries is limited to 3 for the foreseeable future. So that, I believe, is where the most concern is about location of any cannabis business. And so I understand that Bloomington has moved forward with their zoning, and I don't believe there's any interest in businesses to locate anywhere adjacent to the normal property lines. It's more centrally located in Bloomington, but it is 3 in total for normal Bloomington and McLean County.
And DeWitt County.
And DeWitt County.
Further? Mr. Nord?
For some of the zoning change requests or things that I've asked to, or that I have concerns about, like being able to sell in Uptown, because we do have properties that this zoning will allow to be sold in Uptown, or allow marijuana to be sold in Uptown.
The 2 that you made reference to, Mr. Nord, they are near the Uptown, but they are not by definition part of the B2 district. So technically, they are not part of the Uptown. Not going to argue that they're in close proximity to Uptown.
Okay.
But they are B1 zoning.
Yeah, well, the Wild Country property, wasn't that bought under the Uptown TIF?
It's included
Part of the
in the
TIF,
Uptown
correct.
TIF.
But
It's
that's
just-
not part of the
zoning is B1.
official.
The zoning is B1.
The zoning is
Okay,
different.
well, if we would like more restrictions around that, what's our process? Do we vote this down and say, come back to us with different zoning, or what are we looking at doing?
Go ahead, Mr. Day.
That would just be an amendment to this ordinance. It wouldn't have to go back to Plan Commission.
Thank you. Further on this? Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
No.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item 8 is an ordinance authorizing Town of Normal to impose a municipal cannabis retailer's occupation tax on the sale of adult use cannabis. Motion for approval?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on this item.
Mayor Kus, if I could introduce at council's table, we had a memorandum and an amended ordinance for council's consideration tonight. The only change on this draft ordinance is a modification of the effective date. Mr. Day, I think the original date indicated, the previous ordinance in your packet indicated it needed to be approved by July 1st for September 1st, 2020 implementation. As of last week, the General Assembly modified those dates and indicated that they can have an effective date of July 1st. So we have modified the ordinance requiring an April 1st approval, notification of the state for July 1st implementation.
Correct. Yeah, we didn't know the exact, we knew the General Assembly was going to change those dates. We didn't know, I think the original ordinance just had a January 1st date for us to get the ordinance to Department of Revenue. And then there's a small change. They changed the statutory site of the underlying statute.
Discussion on this item. Mr. Nord.
Since the police will be bearing the brunt of any expense, I would like to see any of the tax revenue that the town receives to be directed towards the police pensions.
Further discussion on this item?
Would you expand that for police and fire pensions?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Further discussion on this item? Please call the roll.
I move to amend the ordinance
Is that a proper amendment, Mr. Day? To dedicate, or should that be taken up at another issue?
The amendment can be made.
Okay.
I move to amend the ordinance to state that 100% of the tax revenue received will go towards the police and fire pensions.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Discussion on this item. Mr. McCarthy and then Ms. Cummings.
I would be against that, as that would divert all of our revenue away from any programs to help anywhere else related costs or services related to this issue. So no, I would not be in favor of diverting 100% of the revenue to one single cause, or really any. Depends what our experience would be with putting this in place. So at this point, I wouldn't be in favor of picking one particular favorite place to put the revenue until we really understand what the impact, if we even get a dispensary. We don't even know that we're going to get one yet. So at this point, I wouldn't. It's an interesting conversation, but I think it's too soon to have it.
Ms. Cummings.
Yes, I think we were on the same page. I certainly don't want to put that on the table right now. I mean, it's something that we could talk about during a budgeting session or something of that nature. This is not the time to make a definitive decision on where we want to place that money. I think there needs to be some numbers brought to us and for us to take a look at where it's going to be the greatest impact and how we can better assess where that should go to make a on-the-fly decision on something like that that needs a thorough look at. I cannot do that tonight.
Ms. Lorenz.
Well, heavens knows the pension systems need help, I get it. But I would agree with our other two council members who just spoke here that that may be a bit premature to make that decision tonight.
Mr. Preston.
I would, in light of that, though, just informally, without making another amendment, ask that if and when the time comes that a recreational dispensary is wanting to come, that staff, looks into the revenue side and looks into, I guess, the issue that Mr. Nord brought up about dedicating in some form or fashion the money that would come as a result of it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Smith.
I have a question for Ms. Reese. Would we not run into the same complications that would not be possible to isolate the sales tax receipts from these transactions in order to dedicate them to the pension funds? Is that not a complicating issue, since we would not know specifically what we were receiving in sales tax revenue from this facility?
Well, that would be a challenge, but I think we could somehow craft a dollar amount that we could justify going into police and fire pensions, but I think it would be a challenge. As you indicated, Ms. Smith, we can't really identify one particular retailer and use that
right
tax publicly. So
I think I'm in agreement with the majority of the council. I'm not in favor of dedicating funds, and I'm seeing a pretty clear vote here. So, Mr. Nord?
Yes, Ms. Reese, since this tax would be a specific tax for the sale of marijuana, would we get a separate report like we do for the sale of gas?
I'll ask Mr. Hugh. He's nodding his head, so yes.
Okay, so then it would be very easy to identify the tax revenue coming from all marijuana businesses. We wouldn't be able to identify each particular one.
I think at this point that's a moot point, because I think the council's very clear on where they're going with this. So I'm going to call a vote on the amendment.
I still have one more point to make. This is brand new revenue. This isn't revenue that we have had before. So I think it's kind of greedy of us to take it to spend it for general fund purposes when the brunt of the expense and learning curve is going to fall on our emergency services.
Please call the roll on the amendment.
Mr. McCarthy?
No.
Mrs. Cummings?
No.
Mr. Nord?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
No.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mr. Preston?
No.
Mayor Kus?
No. The amendment fails. We're back to the overriding ordinance. Is there further discussion on that? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. That concludes our general orders. We have one item of new business. Motion to receive and file the 2019 Household Hazardous Waste Collection Report prepared by the Ecology Action Center.
Move approval?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Brown from the Ecology Action Center is here with that report. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have the printed report in your packets. I just have a few of the highlights to go through and take any questions. So as you're likely aware, our fourth locally funded household hazardous waste collection event was held in September with the town of Normal, city of Bloomington, and McLean County all acting as major funders of this. A number of local businesses and several hundred local residents all acted as secondary funders in this unique public-private partnership. These events make us, our community, somewhat unique in the entire state, in that we're one of the few communities that are still providing for the safe collection of household hazardous waste items in the absence of reliable funding from the Illinois EPA, which has been pretty irregular since 2007. The previous three events held through this partnership and coordinated by the EAC all have been very successful, collecting a total of some 70,000 gallons of hazardous waste for proper, safe disposal. These events have been some of the largest in the entire state of Illinois, drawing larger attendance than most similar events elsewhere, due in part to an extended awareness campaign for these collections initiated several months ahead of time, which acts as our fundraising effort for raising of private funds to supplement the public funding. But along with the huge success of these large turnouts, despite extensive planning each year, previous events have often been plagued with traffic backups due to no mechanism to really regulate the arrival of residents, resulting in hundreds of cars often arriving simultaneously, usually early in the day. This, of course, resulted in some long wait times for some residents in the past. So I'm very excited to say that the September 2019 event was the event that finally saw a solution to this problem. This year we instituted a reservation system for the first time, requiring local residents to sign up for an appointment to arrive at a specific time during the event. While I personally had my own doubts hearing about the strategy a year or two ago, this absolutely changed everything. For the first time, I feel we can really speak to the residents' experience at this event in total event time for them, not their wait times. So it's no longer about wait times, it's in and out, how much time did it take them to participate in this event. These times at worst were 20 minutes, at best they were 6 minutes. Total in and out with their materials, get them unloaded, and on their way back to whatever they're doing on their Saturday. So not once during the entire event this year did the traffic spill out onto the road outside the event entrance. This is another first, I believe. First time we've been able to manage that in the recent years since the event has gotten so large, which of course large attendance is a good thing. Feedback from residents was all positive, universally, even ecstatic about the event this year. On the downside, we did see somewhat of a decline in the turnout. I attribute this in part to some reluctance from local residents about this new system, and perhaps in part also people wanting the convenience to drop in whenever they could, whenever they wished, instead of setting an appointment. We also did have some minor problems with some of our advertising for this year's event, which we can fix next time around, and that likely contributed to part of the decline as well. However, that being said, the reduced turnout likely did help with this transition to this new system, in that we did have smaller crowds to deal with. Now that we have successfully transitioned to this new system, we will continue on with this for future events. I do anticipate we will easily be able to recover our past large turnouts over the next couple of household hazardous waste collection events. Do be aware costs for hazardous waste collection are going up, so despite the reduced turnout, costs were still significant, but well within our budget for this event. I do hope to bring in the near future a proposal for renewal of this household hazardous waste agreement for consideration by the council, as well as a separate agreement for a potential feasibility study for a possible permanent household hazardous waste collection facility for our community.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Brown? Mr. Nord?
In your report, it said that last year you had a $19,000 surplus. What happens with those funds?
So the event itself this year cost about $155,000. Of that, $140,000 came from public funds from the city, the town, and the county. And so it was that other $15,000 that came from the fundraising, private funds essentially. Those private funds by law are considered a restricted donation to the Ecology Action Center that we can only use for hazardous waste purposes. We can't use them for anything else. And so those sit in what we call the McLean County Household Hazardous Waste Fund, and we will continue to use those in the future for other hazardous waste needs. And that actually is likely what will pay for the feasibility study for a permanent facility, so we won't be seeking any additional funding from the local governments for that feasibility study.
Okay. Is there any restriction from us, or is there any reason we couldn't reduce the amount that we're going to give you this year, so that way those surplus funds could be used?
In terms of the next time around, you're saying?
Yeah.
We are looking at renewal of this agreement, as I mentioned, so we could consider that, but the costs are actually going up at the same time. And so those residuals are essentially a rainy day fund for when the costs are much more significant than what the public funding has allowed for.
Okay, because the difference is only like $3,000 is what you need, so you can use the rainy fund day to day, and then taxpayers can just pay you whenever the cost goes up later, rather than keep that money in a rainy day fund.
That is a possibility. However, we don't have other residuals, and so if we did not have that rainy day fund, then yes, we would go into debt in order to just finish the event.
Yeah, or you just come back and ask us for a little bit more money. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. McCarthy, I'm sorry.
Congratulations and thanks.
Thank you.
I've nothing but positive about, I've had maybe a half a dozen personal conversations about the event, me just following up with people I knew who participated, and raved about how fast they were in and out this year. That was the single biggest comment I heard, was in and out. Successful helping keeping this stuff getting dumped in culverts and everywhere else, I think is important, particularly some of our environmental work that we need to do yet in improving our environmental quality here in McLean County. The one question I've gotten is, why don't we do this every year? Other than the obvious, just immediate conversation about dollars.
Sure.
Can you guys do this every year? Is this capable? It's a big undertaking, I realize, and you've gotten a place now. Rivian's been generous to lend a parking lot or two to this.
Right. So yeah, I would say the funding is the barrier to doing it more frequently, but akin to single stream curbside automated recycling, the more you reduce the barriers to participation by providing the service more frequently, the more we are going to prevent these hazardous materials from getting into our ground and surface water supplies. And so yes, more frequent would be better if we can find a reasonable means to fund that. We still do apply for state funding, which is now very irregular. So we do have an application on file with the Illinois EPA, and hopefully one of these days we'll get to the top of the list and we will take advantage of that when we do. If that happens to be a year that we're supposed to be using local funding, we will use that state funding first and then save that local funding for a future event.
Just as a general comment to my fellow council members, keeping this stuff out of our creeks and rivers and streams is super critical, and I imagine most of us probably have a story of things getting dumped at the curve, which just goes into our creeks and streams and rivers and has a pretty horrible impact depending on what's getting dumped at the end of your driveway. And so I hope we'll consider doing this on a regular basis to help keep more out of our streams and creekways, because it's bad for our environment, it's bad for our people, it's just not healthy. So the more we can do this type of an event, I'd look to try to continue to find ways to do this.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Ms. Cummings?
Yeah, I won't belabor too much because Councilmember McCarthy pretty much covered a lot of what I wanted to cover, especially understanding the importance of what the work that you all do and how it has an impact on our community. And we have to think more in the vein of protection of our natural surroundings. But certainly we appreciate the work that you do. And for me, it's about looking for how we can help make this happen more often and be more out there so people know that it's happening. Because I'll be honest, I didn't know until the last minute. And so, but for me, I still haven't discarded any of my materials. But if there was another opportunity sooner, that would be better than waiting till a later time to have those items removed. So this is something that we have to talk about. We have to start talking about our environment and how to make it safe for all of our residents. We're seeing effects of what happens across this country when you don't take these things into consideration and take them seriously. And so we have to keep that in the forefront of our minds if we're talking about a completely safe community in its totality.
If you don't mind, I'll take advantage of your point to make a pitch for, we do maintain an email list for local residents to be in the loop on our collection events, as well as other events that are in Central Illinois that are open to our residents. And so go to ecologyactioncenter.org, sign up for that email list. The sign up link is on the right-hand side of the homepage. Please sign up for that. It's free, it's easy. Do be aware, we will ask you for a donation for the Hazardous Waste Fund, because that's how it works. But it's voluntary, so we never exclude anyone.
Mr. Nord?
As someone that's grown up picking up stuff that people dump on the side of the roads, I grew up right next to the landfill, and to this day, they still dump stuff. So any advertising you can do to say, take it to you guys instead of just on the side of somebody's field would be very, very welcome for a lot of people in the community.
Thank you.
So thank you for what you do, because it is important. And seeing places where people have just dumped oil out is awful, and it happens more often than I think people realize.
And we did, and I'm not sure if it all reflects in the budget in the packet, but I think it was between $8,000 and $10,000 worth of marketing on this year's event, including in-kind from some local media outlets. And so we do try and up it every time. But unfortunately, we do hear, 1 week afterwards, every single time, when's your next event, because somebody missed it. So.
Do you also work with the local oil change shops, because they accept waste too, and I don't know that people know that they can take it there if you're not doing an event?
Thank you, and I'm going to plug another service. And so if you go to recyclebn.org, that's where you can find our Recycle Coach app. It's in your browser, or you can download it to your smartphone. And so that's a 24-hour directory of services for any sort of waste or recycling. And so it does include some of the local oil change places. We find Team Automotive to be very helpful in taking oil gas mix, those kind of materials.
Yeah, antifreeze.
Excellent.
Please call the roll.
Actually, it's just a motion to receive and pass that we
Yeah,
vote
do
on
we
it.
vote on
I thought because it's a motion, yeah.
Yeah. Motion.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye.
Motion is to receive a file is approved, and thank you for the update, Mr. Brown. We appreciate it. Before going to adjournment, council concerns and comments, and I'll start with you, Mrs. Reese.
I have one to share with the public and with council. I'm going to display our new historic Normal Theater ornament, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary. These are for sale at the Children's Discovery Museum and, of course, the Normal Theater. So we would encourage everyone to go out and acquire their beautiful silver, because of the silver anniversary ornament. So, and then the only other thing I wanted to mention is kind of exciting, because we have another conference here in Uptown this week, and it is the Illinois Association of Museums statewide conference. So we're welcoming them to Uptown, and hopefully they're visiting the Children's Discovery Museum while they're here.
Great. Mr. Preston.
Yep, I've got one. Since our last meeting, Councilwoman Smith and I went to the Normal Theater, actually, and were on hand when they showed the new Grinch movie.
Full house.
It was. I believe they were sold out. It was. We were standing. It was a full house, and so congrats to the theater and everyone for that. Thank you for letting us come and crash the party a little bit, and obviously thanks to any residents who had something on their mind and wanted to talk to Karen and I. We were glad to be there.
Ms. Smith.
This is a blatant plug for my daughter's play. She is a proud member of the Seedling Theater, which is presenting The Magic Tree House, a ghost tale for Mr. Dickens Jr. this weekend. I know when you're finished with the Festival of Trees supporting the Baby Fold, you can attend a play for your children. Thursday night at 7 o'clock is Pay What You Can. Friday and Saturday night also at 7 o'clock. The tickets are $10 for adults, $5 for kids and students, and the matinee is Sunday at 3 o'clock. This weekend only.
And I think Seedling Theater is a recipient of Harmon Arts Grants as well, multiple years. Motion for adjournment? Oh.
Before you can motion, I want to wish you a enjoyable honeymoon to you and Mrs. Preston.
Thank you. I will not be thinking about the town. And I move we adjourn.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Right? I know. You know, you told me that he was going to go right now, literally the week before.
Well, thank you. I've been here before, but it's been close to 15, 20 years, so. Welcome. Hi, thank you. How you guys doing? Good, how are you? Good, good. Look very familiar.